this morning's budget session meeting for February 3rd to order. Like a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Okay, study session is now open. Okay. We need a roll call. Carla, if you would, please. Yeah.
Bergen.
Here.
Drinkow.
Here.
Kangas.
Here.
Waldstein. Absent. Rothy.
Here.
McKenzie.
Here.
Scherer. Absent.
Councilperson Waldstein, I think, is in Washington greeting her new granddaughter, or grandchild anyway. And sounded like they left her a while ago. And Councilperson Scherer is at a conference in Louisiana. So they are excused absences by far. So, James, are you ready to get us
Yes,
back
sir, I am.
back
Ready
on
as we're
track?
gonna
Okay.
Where we last left off, it's like a Scooby-Doo or something like that. We were going through the capital, different capital funds we have, different projects, et cetera. We kind of went through those quickly. I don't know if we need to recap that at this point in time. We can certainly do that when we finish the rest of the budget. So I guess as we move through, we'll finish the rest of the budget, the enterprise funds, and then if we could take a 5-10 minute break, sir, kind of regather, and then start back into, now what do we want to do? We've seen everything. What do we want to look at? What are the big things we need to tackle first, and then progress forward? And then we'll kind of see where we end up today as far as time and end result. And we do have this on the agenda Monday as well at the very end, just in case there's other things that need to be pulled or looked at or finished out. But hopefully we'll get through what we need today and have a good direction. From a timing standpoint, there's a certain requirement for publication that has to happen legally for everybody. Our hearing will be March 6th, but we're going to need to publish a week and a half or so before that. It's a 10 and 20. I don't get into what 10 and 20 rolls in. So to give Jennifer time to really get this prepped into the papers, we'd like to have this finished no later than the 12th. That Monday, we almost kind of have to be done with pretty much something going into hearing. You can always lower things at the hearing, you just cannot increase them by category. So if we can get something to the point of going to hearing by the 12th, we'll be in good shape, we'll be compliant, we can get everything then taken care of on the March 6th hearing. So that's kind of the timeline as we progress forward from today. So unless there's any questions initially from council, we can start in with the water fund and kind of move through.
Just a correction, our meeting is the 5th, and then the next one is the 19th?
Correct.
Okay,
So if we had to have another meeting,
Okay.
the 12th would be a viable candidate, meaning it's another Monday, it's unscheduled, or any other time, but that date in general, whether it's emails or whatever we need to answer, we would want to have that kind of as our drop dead date to be done.
Okay.
So yes, sir, the 5th and the 19th are our scheduled February meetings.
very good, thank you.
Yes, sir. So with that, I guess, Mike, if you'd want to come up, we will start in with the water fund. Go through WPC sewer, wastewater, sewer fund. These are all the fun ones, but the vital ones. And then we'll wrap up for a little bit and head back in again. We're still under our brief timeline too, just to regurgitate that out. Still our brief timeline.
Figure out where it's at.
Good morning. Got three enterprise funds that we're going to touch upon this morning, and that'd be water, sewer, and solid waste. And within the sewer fund, we have a couple of different unique areas. One is the wastewater treatment facility, and then the other one is line maintenance, which is responsible for caring for our sanitary sewer collection system and our stormwater collection system. So One thing that I want to point out is the water division and sewer line maintenance divisions are housed together. They work very closely together, and they are under the direction of a superintendent. And so that's what we're seeing right down here. So this is a little bit of a newer management structure, and it is working very, very well. Like to have these two areas kind of packaged together because they are the diggers. This is for underground utilities. Our water system is about 5 to 6 feet underground, and the sanitary can be anywhere from 8 to 20 feet underground. So anything that involves repairing water mains, these are the guys we go to. These are the diggers. So that personnel structure and management structure is working very, very well. So within the water fund, got this sheet here, and a year ago we adopted user fees that were going to increase 5% in July of 17 and 5% again in July of 18. That rate structure was necessary to help finance the water main replacement and construction underneath Bremer Avenue that was estimated at about $1.6 million. Going forward, we are not forecasting any additional rate increases as we move into 2019, 2020. So that's good.
We made that move basically to start to build a fund that would pay for this instead of having to bond for it all at one time.
Correct. Actually, and we'll do a water revenue bond, so it won't count against our capacity, which we're really going to have a good discussion about that today and the issues with it. And then, as Mike said, it's we talk about taxation versus usage. Again, it touches on all the areas that do not pay taxes. This accomplishes them having some skin in the game because they do use a substantial amount of water, sewer, et cetera. So it's a much more fair approach to how this should be allocated across the city instead of just taxing for everything. And when you look across the state, League of Cities, they all recommend this is the preferred approach to do that, so you truly encompass everything associated with water in the water fund. And so Mike has done a good job of getting us to the point where we have a good balance, because that's the other thing when you issue bonds, and I had a discussion this week, if we don't have enough fund balance to cover the cash requirement that's associated with water bonds, that's why they're really different. Geo bonds don't need that. You have to borrow that as well on top of it and then hold it until the end, and it just makes it even more expensive. So we have a good balance like we're supposed to, and that allows us to have a better rate, better bond as we go forward than we would have otherwise. So it's important we maintain that. But yeah, when we get in the sewer, we'll have a little more discussion, I'm sure, about rate increases as the treatment plant comes online.
Okay. So on the second page of the spreadsheet, up at the very top, you'll see that there is a service truck that is scheduled for replacement. Otherwise, at the very bottom, as James was mentioning, that there is a balance that we try to maintain at 35 to 50%, and that is per our bond council's direction. Questions?
Just had a note that we've got the first kind of payment coming out of this portion for the Bremer Avenue reconstruction for the water that we've done is coming out of this year's budget.
Yes, sir, that would be our goal. I think if you look at on the second page, the
It's at the 165.
6910 transfer to project.
Yep.
That is where we have about 165,000 allocated. Again, that'll shift depending on what the actual payment comes in. But that is where we've got that earmarked to cover that, already factored into here, because we know we have to make that payment. So
Just a note that item on your or your detail sheets, 6403 with interdepartmental charges, and on the spreadsheet, first page, that same account, the figures do not agree, so I'm not sure. I'm assuming that the spreadsheet is closer. It's got an increase factored into it.
Okay, so you'll see that those interdepartmental charges are a percent of many different divisions. And until we finalize those other divisions, what you're seeing on the spreadsheet here is an estimate.
Okay.
And that when we get into finalizing kind of everyone else's budget, this line item for interdepartmental charges will then be updated and finalized as well.
Very good.
Looks like it's just what's this year's projection, what's on the
Yeah.
detail sheet.
Just missed it is all. It still shows the 251, 793 projected. It should be the 259, 347, so. I thought we had all those. We'll get that one too.
Any other questions for Mike on this, on the water fund? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next one.
Just one real quick question, if I could, before we move on. Again, just picking up on some of the chatter that's been in the news lately about water, nitrates, radium, those type of things. Maybe just a reassurance for the community, we're well within tolerances, those type of things. We don't have any issues looming out there that we need to be aware of.
We're within tolerance. On our nitrates, I would not say we're well within. Tolerance, that's one area that we're always kind of very mindful of. The threshold is 10, and we have 2 wells that are down around 7 or 8, that's fine, but then we have 2 wells that are up around 9. So we're still fine, but it is certainly something we're very mindful of. This is where we get into wellhead protection. This is where we get into nitrate and nutrient reduction coming off of fields. This is something we're very concerned about, as are other communities across the state and region. As we kind of highlight it in the winter newsletter, we talked about the cover crops. That is probably one of the we hope is one of the most effective ways of addressing nitrate and nutrient runoff into not only our surface water, but also seepage into our groundwater, because you can cover, thousands of acres that are within our capture area for the well systems.
All right, WPC.
So on our flow chart here for the Public Works Department, we're now clear over on the lower right-hand side. And we also addressed a management, structural change in our management, where in anticipation of the wastewater treatment improvements and hiring a 4th employee out there, probably in about 2 years, we thought this was an appropriate time to look at making our senior wastewater operator the superintendent of wastewater operations. And the significance of that is that they are they have some additional duties and responsibilities as it relates to management and supervision. They are now in charge of responsible for doing performance evaluations and ensuring that the city's personnel policies and procedures are carried out. In the spreadsheet, as far as get to this summary sheet here. Talking about revenues. Again, a year ago, we we adopted a 2-year rate structure with a 5% rate increase in July of 17, and also approved the one for July of 18. Going forward, we are going to be very shortly approving an engineering agreement for those wastewater treatment improvements, and a component of that is to address the financing of that project and looking at the state revolving fund to help us with that endeavor. The nice thing about that is the loan rate is 2%, of which half of that can be reimbursed back to the city for water quality projects within the community. So that process is going to begin here very shortly. That process will also help look at our finances on the revenue side as well as the projected expenditures, and we will be probably this October, November, talking about what rate structure we will need going into 19, 20, 21, 22. Okay? It's going to go up. But how much it goes up, that determination we hope to get to in like September, October of this year. That will give people and businesses an opportunity to prepare for it, anticipate, and budget for it going forward.
Any increases we would enact, if that is what occurs, wouldn't take effect till July 1st. So there'd be 6 to 8 to 9 months notice, so that would be able to be accomplished.
In the spreadsheet here, some of the major things that you'll see are utilities, interdepartmental charges again, and I was just thinking that maybe in the account detail sheet, seeing if that number also needs to be updated. But again, those will be finalized as a lot of these other budgets are finalized as well. Otherwise, it's pretty much routine maintenance and operations at the wastewater treatment facility, with the exception of that major capital project.
Any questions from the council for Mike on the,
I seem to remember there was a kind of a rotating, the clarifier. And is that part of the reason for the huge jump in the projected budget for this year, the 79,000 instead of 24,000? So I'm looking at line,
Yes, that would be other capital improvements.
Yeah.
Account 6751.
okay, so,
that unit's been ordered? Is that,
Yes, the field personnel have been up to get all their measurements, and they have submitted their shop drawing, and we've reviewed it, and they're going to begin the fabrication process and get that taken care of as quickly as possible.
and then it should all fall in this current
Yes.
year. Okay.
okay.
Again, I know, I think I've asked this a couple of times, but as the community continues to grow, we've got capacity to handle that. It's just keeping the equipment updated and staying current with
Correct.
DNR regulations, those type of things.
How large a capacity do we have at the center itself, Mike? I know some of it becomes infrastructure and getting out of those areas, et cetera, but if that's accomplished, we do have a sizable amount of capacity yet in the actual center, the treatment plant itself.
They talk about capacity in 3 areas. One is flow, and we have a flow capacity, a permitted capacity of 2.3 million gallons a day. We average about 1. We kind of peak at maybe 1.4. So we have capacity there, but then the other is treating for nutrients within the water. So you have what they refer to as BOD, which is biological oxygen demand. They also have your ability to remove suspended solids, and as well as the reductions in phosphorus and nitrates, and so there's lots of different measures they use for your capacity and ability to treat. One of the purposes for changing our treatment process is to be able to meet new regulations as it relates to phosphorus removal and those types of things, which are in effect fertilizers and nutrients that would promote growth within the rivers, which is not what we want to see happen because it depletes the oxygen in the river and water systems.
So we have a good amount of capacity left in, that's what that translated into.
Well, yeah, yes and no. We do have capacity, but the new wastewater improvements are actually going to improve capacity in areas that we might be a little bit weak. So,
That's always a question I get when you see a new housing development come in and that type of thing is, when are we going to exceed our capacity to support those type of things? And want to make sure those that are listening know that we've got plenty of room to grow. So,
It gets so big that that's starting to happen, we got all kinds of other problems we're gonna have to deal with, but absolutely.
We'll test the capacity about 7 o'clock tomorrow. Right about halftime.
We didn't want to mention that's where I have flow increases. Oh, that was a terrible tangent. Okay, now if you want to get into the sewer itself.
okay, so what you need to know about this year's sewer line maintenance budget is operationally, we have made no changes. Accounting-wise, we have combined, it used to be split into two different divisions, sanitary sewer maintenance and storm sewer maintenance. And we were basically just splitting everything 50-50. So if they would, previously for accounting purposes, if they were to, any supplies they would buy would get split 50-50. It's like, why are we doing that? They would charge fuel to one account in the first 6 months of the year, and in the second 6 months, they would charge it to the other account. And it's like, accounting-wise, we don't need to do this. And so what you'll see now is where if you look on previous budgets, you would see storm sewer maintenance and sanitary sewer maintenance. Now they've been combined into one, and we just refer to it as sewer line maintenance. Okay. Operationally, nothing has changed. So a big portion is labor. We have 2 employees. Within this division, we have a senior sewer line operator and then a sewer line operator, and then they are under the supervision of the superintendent for water and sewer maintenance, sewer line maintenance. So supplies for whether it's castings, we have over 1,200 sanitary sewer manholes. We have over 1,200 storm sewer intakes. We got 70 miles of sanitary sewer main, and in addition to the storm sewer. So again, anything that's kind of underground, these are the guys that take care of it. They inspect it, they maintain it, they televise it, they clean it. We talk about that 7 districts of Waverly. We started using that for the sidewalk program, but we've used it now for whether it's painting hydrants or cleaning and televising our sanitary sewer system. Supplies in here, we have like castings, so we are also, the street department is as in advance of seal coating, we're making sure that all our manholes are accessible. They have not always been that way. They used to be paved over, and every time like they wanted to get in and inspect or televise, they would have to jackhammer them out to access them, and no longer. We have a pretty good system now. which is allowing for better operation, maintenance, inspection, televising, and cleaning of our sanitary sewer collection system. We are also doing manhole rehab. Last year, we did annually we do 20 to 24 manholes. Again, we got 1,200 sanitary sewer manholes. If they were built before 1970, they could very well be brick manholes. So rather than removing and replacing those, we are repairing and rehabbing them in place. And we use a contracted out, and we have a concrete liner that is sprayed on the inside, and you'll hear more about that in a month because we do it annually, so this is about the time of year that we put these contracts out for bid. Okay? Inspire, any questions?
At the risk of extending your discussion, last summer, fall, there were a lot of straw rolls.
Straw
around-
wattles.
Around the stormwater manholes or intakes, reasoning for that being what?
So that you don't get silt and sedimentation into the storm sewer system. Okay, so the roadway contractors are to prevent erosion, silt sedimentation from getting into the storm sewer. When our roadway contractors do a pretty good job of controlling that. Our building contractors, not so much. And that's something that we're going to need to work on, because if it runs into the street, it's going to run into the storm sewer, which is then going to probably go into a detention facility, if not directly into the river. So those are important measures to have stormwater pollution prevention plans. When we talk about that, it's primarily about silt and sediment and erosion.
Thank you.
You know, you've already kind of touched on the sewer fund, the summary itself. Probably just go right into solid waste.
So within the organizational chart, the solid waste division is under the direction of the public services superintendent. And streets, the personnel in streets and solid waste, they're kind of transitional. They will float back and forth. We get a snow event, the solid waste guys help out with snow removal. And when we get into special collections and double routes, or if there's vacations, or people off on the solid waste, the street personnel will slide right on over and help out and backfill as needed. On the revenue side of solid waste, up above, we have not had rate increases for a couple of years, and we are not forecasting any rate increases going forward. This is, again, we're controlling expenses, where our revenues are stable and pretty good. We get revenues from our residential accounts, commercial accounts. We get revenue from our recycling products that are collected at the recycling center. Recycling materials are picked up curbside. We pay a fee for taking those, but that fee is slightly less than the landfill fee. So it's still efficient, effective, and good thing to do. But our recycling revenues are coming from our recycling center. The number one revenue source would be cardboard. We also provide services for businesses. Where on Wednesdays we have cardboard collection from businesses within the community as well. Lots and lots of services are provided. Again, we talk about commercial garbage collection, residential collection, curbside recycling, the recycling center, yard waste operations. We have special collection weeks. We do Christmas tree collection. This is on the yard waste side, we're a processing facility. 100% of the yard waste that comes in is processed and goes back out into the community as a new product. So compost, wood mulch. We provide delivery for a nominal fee. That's another area where we're generating some revenue to offset our expenses. We're very proud of the fact that the past 2 citizen surveys that were done, solid waste ranked number 1. The first time, everyone thought it was a fluke. The second time, I think, showed just how valuable of a service we are providing and that people like the variety of options that they have.
I don't think this probably needs a lot of discussion today, but my understanding on the curbside recycling, we only have one size of container that we're providing.
Nope, we have 2. For the recycling, you can have a 35 or 65 blue container, just like we do for garbage. So again, we have a variety of options for the size of container you have, and we have fee structures that support those options as well.
That may be something we just need to promote a little more. I've had folks that use the old green tubs and set them out, and they end up setting 2, 3 of them out where they don't have the room for the large recycling, but they said if I could have a smaller container, I'd probably use that. And I wasn't sure if we had the 2 sizes or not.
I have a 35, my neighbor has a 65, so.
I think we even have a bigger one yet, do we not? Is our commercial?
We have a 95, or multiple 95s, like our school systems. They like the 95-gallon recycling containers, and they may have 2, 3, 4 of them in their facilities. We also work very closely with the school system, with Wartburg, with Bartles and other facilities where they may have opportunities to enhance and improve and increase their recycling. So we're very much part of that. But this is also where we are experiencing some challenges in growth. Our curbside recycling, when we started commingling and providing the containers, we have seen a 50% increase in volume in 3 years. And so is that trend going to continue, or is it going to kind of level off? It's something that is creating some challenges for us, I guess, especially when we get into like double route days. So like Thanksgiving is on Thursday and Friday, so we're going to have a double route on Wednesday and then the following Monday. And so those are the times that we are starting to kind of feel squeezed, feel a little crunched here, and something that we're continuing to monitor and manage going forward. Our recycling truck that we have is only 3-4 years old, and we're at times having to make trips to empty it daily during our recycling week. So options is to replace it with a larger truck, going from 17 cubic yards up to 27 cubic yards. But again, we feel that as we project forward, we're still, that truck is going to be filling up too. So the other option to give consideration to is weekly curbside collection of recycling. Okay? Now, as a consumer, I love that idea. Just put it out weekly along with my garbage container, but it creates some challenges staffing-wise. And so this is going to have to be addressed probably within, certainly probably a year from now. We're going to have to make some decisions on what to do going forward.
Are there options as far as transfer stations, compactors, that we could bale it up? I see semis going down the road where it looks like somebody's baled this product up.
Right, and we have that happen at the recycle center itself, but the fact that we commingle, we don't have to separate. I mean, when it was separating, I think it was easier to maybe have something like that done. We could go back to that. There's a lot of discussion at some point I think we're going to have on this because, initially when I got here, a lot of things in my mind, those have all gone, and they're starting to come back since we're getting back into some of this. But, when you drive around the city, you'll see anywhere from this nice blue can that the containers can be picked up easy. We have trucks built for that, et cetera, to 5 or 6 little cans, 4 garbage cans, and a box stuck in the ground. I don't understand why we allow that, honestly, as a city. Everybody has to have a garbage container of this style. Why do we allow 15, 20 different homemade, God knows what? It's inefficient. You have labor issue that you have to get out now, try and sling that, try and catch it running down the street. When things overturn, that's the stuff that's blowing over everywhere. It's not the big containers for the most part. We need to probably someday address that. The efficiency is just not there, and the consistency isn't either from garbage to that. Why do we allow that when we don't allow it for garbage? I'd love to find my own homemade garbage cans, not pay the fee, and just throw them out there too, but we don't allow that. So why do we do it for recycling? It's something that's always kind of bothered me. And the more I see it, there are, I point you to the houses, 6, 7, 8 cans of banged up old garbage cans sitting there, and they have to shake it out, because if they don't, we get complaints that my stuff wasn't taken. Well, it's jammed in there so hard you couldn't get it out. We need to probably address some of that. I think we'll probably kind of be bringing that forward in the next few months to see what should we be doing with that. It just doesn't make sense to me. So we'll have that discussion, and probably more in this discussion, a lot more about that.
We'll continue to promote, inform, and educate. We try to encourage more and more people to use the standard city container. It does make us more efficient, effective.
Absolutely.
And like with the recycling containers, we have the 35 and 65, and the price is the same. It's like $2.10 a month for either size. So,
And is it possible we could even do the 95 for residential if we had to? I mean, I don't know if that's possible as well, if it truly starts to eliminate some of the need for 4 and 5 and 6 containers, cans. Because again, we have equipment built to do this, but if we're not utilizing it and we're not utilizing the staff that way as well, then why are we not? It's the big question. It's not efficient at all. We need to start to address that.
It's a good discussion to have. It's also a good problem to have. That
It is.
we have people that are recycling. The community has taken to recycling and doing that. So, yeah, it is a
Absolutely.
discussion. I would just caution, don't do the 95 for residential. My wife would jump all over it.
Maybe an upcharge for that one. A lot of plastic made that one there. That's a big container. So,
and again, one of our, on the curbside recycling side, one of our concerns is that we have the appropriate products being recycled, and we're not seeing garbage and other stuff in there, and that usually requires a visual check on that stuff. And so,
stray cat
Solid-
crawls in, it's a bad thing to have happen. It does happen.
solid waste has a lot of capital equipment. Our residential garbage trucks are over $200,000 apiece. And we have a couple of commercial trucks and the recycling truck. And so there is a lot of capital equipment that we need to be making sure we are setting aside enough funds for. The last time we had not been setting enough aside into equipment reserve, and we ended up having to take a loan out in order to purchase our 2 residential trucks. That can happen. Going forward, we think we're looking pretty good, and as we said, we're not looking at a rate increase for July of 18, and actually going forward into 19 and 20, we think we may be okay as well. Questions?
Has there been any change in the volume of solid waste you've been collecting to that, or the single stream recycling? Has that volume increased over the years?
Well, yeah, certainly the curbside commingled has. We've seen a little bit of a decrease at the at the recycling center. As far as opportunities going forward, we see that one area that we would really like to work with our building official on at the county is managing waste on construction sites. We see a lot of these, like the big dumpsters, very appropriate, but we see a tremendous amount of cardboard going into those dumpsters that could be recycled. So we would like to work with our contractors, whether they're building homes or businesses, and see if we can come up with, again, some things that are effective and efficient for them as well as for us to divert a lot of that product out of the landfill. And like I said before, the one product that has a lot of value to it is the cardboard. Yep.
So Mike, are you seeing less waste going to the landfill then, corresponding with the increase in recycling?
I believe our landfill tonnage coming from Waverly has stayed fairly consistent, which is good. You know, Waverly is continuing to grow,
Yeah.
but our solid waste that's going to landfill is remaining level. So that means our recycling efforts are maybe picking up that gap.
And is the staff, they're transporting the waste to Waterloo, is that right?
The landfill's in Waterloo, the recycling is in Charles City. The commingled recyclables go up to Charles City.
Because I know when I was out there talking to the staff, they really run into a time crunch to get everything picked up and to the landfill by the time it closes, especially on those double
On the
pickup
double
days.
route days,
It can be
right.
tough, yeah.
Overtime's okay. I mean, if they're having they get off at 3:30, if they end up having to stay late till 4 or 4:30, it's okay. If it's 7 o'clock at night, that's not something we want to see. But, you know, if we have some overtime, you know, until 4 o'clock or something, that's okay. But again, as we go forward, this is the solid waste area with the variety of services is an area where, you know, we're going to have to think about how we map this out with staffing, equipment, and services.
And the only thing I'm thinking is, I hadn't realized how much revenue we got from the cardboard recycling. If there was some way that we could encourage people in the community that if you have a lot of cardboard, it's much better to take it to the recycling center than just put it out on the curb.
Right.
Because that's a huge, huge difference for the city.
Yep, and at the recycling center, styrofoam, we will accept styrofoam up there, and that can take up a tremendous amount of volume in your garbage container. So what a lot of people do is maybe once a month or every few weeks, they head out to the recycling center. You know, cardboard, styrofoam, glass, you know, can be accepted out there. So we partner with other communities. Our styrofoam goes down to Cedar Falls because they have a way to process it there. Now, they get revenue from it. They don't pay us anything. But again, it's a service we're able to provide. They have the equipment for processing it into a commodity that they can then get some revenue. So we're also, glass is another one that they have working through Cedar Falls. With Cedar Falls, we now have an outlet for glass. It was, other than our transportation costs there, we don't have any disposal costs. So even if it's zero revenue, as long as there's no disposal, that's still a net gain.
Do we offer a hazardous material day or days during the year?
That Bremer County takes care of addressing
Okay.
hazardous household materials. So they still have the disposal site at the old landfill, and you can work through them.
The other question I would have, Mike, is have you ever figured out or come up with a cost per trip to the landfill in Blackhawk County for our trucks?
Yes, we have we have that figured out. We've also got for the recycling side of things. This is you know, the question is, well, why do we take it up to Charles City? Why not take it down to Waterloo or Cedar Falls? And it has to do with netting out the cost to the city. So we have calculated our per mile cost, both for equipment, fuel, labor. And so if there's a direction you want to look at, that's easy enough for us to put together, whether it's on the solid waste or recycling side.
Thank you. Any other questions? Otherwise, Mike, thank you for going through all those departments with us. James, it's back to you.
Yes, sir. The last page, I know it's so sad, isn't it? The last page of the book is the transfers you see. So when you go through the various parts of the budget, whether it be, the police department, fire department, the golf course, et cetera, you see the transfers in, transfers out, various departments. This is a summary of where those all come from, where they are. You've seen them already, but this is a single page of what it is and how it should be. And so we have about $5.5 million in interdepartmental transfers, multiple funds, et cetera. And this is just that kind of a summary. So again, we've covered them throughout, but it's just a nice one page for you to take a look at, kind of matching up where they come from and where they are. So
I know we briefly talked last time we were together about the support for the Law Center.
Yep.
And if it was possible, appropriate to use some loss funding there.
it is not, apparently, talking to the bond attorneys and the Ehlers and Cooney in either this year or the years forward, it really is not. Construction costs certainly would have been, but the operational costs, they determined because of the language, were not acceptable to be looked at. I like the idea. They just said, I don't think.
It's one of those, even if we could, it's the question, do you do it as a one-year type thing, knowing you couldn't do it going forward? But
Absolutely. So they kind of answered that for us, that we'll just apparently not do that, so. So that, I guess, is your budget in first glance. I know we've covered a lot, and there's a lot of things we need to go back through now and start to make some decisions on, or at least take a look at. If we could recess briefly, Mayor, just to kind of recompose, regather, would that be appropriate?
If you wish, that's,
I wouldn't mind it, maybe for 10 minutes, maybe come back at 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock?
Just to start back in and kind of process out everything you've seen and maybe look back through. Let us kind of grab what we need again and get ready to go. If we could do that, that'd be appreciated.
all right. Recess until 9 o'clock, please.
Thank you, sir.
study, or the budget session for February 3rd, please.
Okay, like I said, we've gone through kind of first cut of what we've wanted to for budget. I don't know at this point, are there specific questions or anything that you're wanting to address? We will start to touch on debt service, capacity, significant infrastructure projects, et cetera. Initially, we came in with a rate of 1484. I know there's been some small reductions made already through Parks and Leisure Services. That whole group, they have trimmed out another 22,000. Takes us to about 1479, 78, somewhere in there. At some point, we're gonna have to go back through and make some decisions on, no matter how small they are. A lot of it's gonna be, where's your appetite for rate, whether it be increased, whether it be held flat. That's something that we'll have to kind of figure out too, and I don't know if there's any comment to that point right now, or if we want to go through this again at one first, or,
Yes, maybe a general question, what's not in here that we've talked about as far as projects, those type of things that need to be added in from a capital perspective?
okay? It's a great question. We have factored in the Adams Parkway Bridge reconstruction. That was part of the local option sales tax funding, so that is in here. We had talked briefly about the first payment in Bremer Avenue being a water revenue bond, water bond with fees. That's in here. We do not have factored in here the Parkway yet. That again is local option and TIF. I had some headache last night about 6:30 when it kind of popped up as to, oh, if we delay that payment a year, oh, what does that do? And I'll show you the capacity issues there. I've solved it this morning. I think it's good. It really shook things a little bit. We may have to make a partial payment this first year to make that work, which is not a big deal. We have fund balance. We have things like that in both TIF and local option that can accommodate that. So again, not a huge issue, just had to reset a little bit. And the largest part of that's going to be, what do the bids look like? You know, can we or can we not proceed with all the projects we want to do depending on the bids? That's where the capacity comes in.
20th Street and Cedar Lane?
The
or
Parkway are the two that I have factored in. Cedar Lane, based on the initial discussions, that was the third of them that would go in or not go in, and that's something we'll discuss as well. So those are not in the current budget. They're not in the debt. They're not in anything at this point in time. You know, as we talk through some of those, because the other item that we touched on a little while ago, we really haven't brought up yet is, I know, Tab, we were looking at South Riverside Park area and the multiple options of, should we do some improvements there, whether it be a single phase, a second phase, how much do we want to do there, if anything, as well. And so I know Tab has maps and that, we'll jump into that as well to kind of remind everybody what that looks like, what it could be. That's not factored in there either, because again, I would put a little debt there for that as well if we did wanted to go forward with it. I think the initial proposal was a couple $100,000 for the first phase, another $200,000-300,000 for the second phase. How far down that hole do you want to go as well? So those are the things that we really are looking at. And so when we talk about being at a levy of 1479 now, we'll call it that, 1480. Cedar Lane is not in there. That would increase the levy about 22 cents. We'd emailed that out earlier, about roughly 22 cents. The 20th Street section, which Mike was handing out maps, thank you for getting those. It kind of shows you where that project, that first phase of that project's going to go. You see Knight Avenue on the right. It goes past that, and of course that is the entrance into Eisenach. It goes past that, and then you go down quite a ways, but not all the way, obviously, to Fifth. It's well short of that. The second portion of this first project would be finishing the junk to Fifth, and then a little more on the to the north. But that would be the first cut, the first 1.6 million, 2 million right in there. This is what that first project looked like for 20th Street. That's about 40 cents on the levy.
And does that include the Fifth Avenue Railroad reconstruction
Yes.
as part of that 1.6?
Yes,
And
both
how
the
many-
railroad pieces there, and then Fifth Avenue is where as well.
So what's encompassed on this map plus
Yes,
Fifth Avenue?
Fifth
And that
Avenue.
was how many cents?
About 40. So 1.6 million, 2 million, somewhere in there, about 40 cents. So those are the couple that are not in here. Cedar Lane, 20th Street, those are really the ones that have been talked about the most, that we are ready, in a sense, whether it be engineering or agreements to go forward. in the park itself, if you did phase one, $200,000, it'd be, trying to think, nickel, probably on the levy, 5 cents roughly, 5, 6 cents. And then as you get more, double it, you get to $500,000. If it was the second phase, that'd be a dime. I mean, it all factors out. And so these are rough estimates. When Jennifer gets kind of some final orders and we get everything situated out, it'll be close, right in there within, a few cents, give or take. But for planning purposes, that's kind of what we're looking at, is those are the big projects not included in here so far.
And over how many years then,
10 years,
for any of those?
all of it. We try to stay at a 10-year bond. Anything more, Moody's, we all, that's called rapid replenishment, rapid refunding, rapid payback, depending on who you're talking to, how they want to have it set. And my goal is to get 100% of our debt to be 10 years or less. And we're pretty close to that now. So I don't really like to go longer than 10 years unless we have to. The Parkway could be one where we have to go to 11 just to get that first partial payment in to make that fit. Again, not a huge issue, but we try to stay to 10 the most we can. And that's probably the easiest thing to do.
So really, I'm sorry, Tim. As you say, really, it's the only two that are factored in already in the paperwork we've gotten is the Adams Parkway refinishing and the Bremer Avenue payment.
Correct.
Correct. I guess what I would throw out there, and just now before we go much further, to me, the South Riverside Park project is a nice-to-have project, not a need-to-have project at this point. I mean, it would be nice to do something there, but with the constraints we've got on the budget, even though it's only a nickel or so that would be adding, to me, right now, that's a consideration that's kind of like, I'd rather not even just push that.
Okay.
If we did not go ahead with the Cedar Valley Parkway project, which you said was being funded through lost funds and TIF, could those lost funds then be reallocated to some of these other projects, so we wouldn't be increasing the levy to do them?
Of course. As I said before, you just delay the Parkway for as long as it takes to pay off those projects, so probably 10 years. The Parkway would be delayed. So it's one or the other. If you don't want to raise taxes, then something's got to give, and you delay it 10 years. Or if you want to do it all, you're going to raise taxes to pay for it somehow, or possibly raise taxes. I shouldn't say you will for sure, but you're going to have to look at that part of it being taxable. That's just the limits that we have.
Seems like the other department we need to talk more at length about today is what's going to happen to I don't know the exact name, the accounting department?
Billing.
Yeah.
With the billing and the transfer of that and how that'll affect.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a significant piece of what we're talking about here as well. And we can certainly jump into that if you want to at this point. That was kind of one of the first things we were going to discuss. We went back through, and we can discuss it right now if you'd like.
I think so,
Before-
because, again, that's a fairly big hit to the budget, losing the income, and then
Yeah, it's about 50 cents on the levy.
there's staff implication.
Yes, sir.
I would agree that we can get into that, but I do have a question for Sarah. Your revenue detail on the library says we no longer have an ICN room. And your detail is a little over 13,000 in for internet provider.
The revenue portion, we used to, if there were outside meetings that were coming in to use our ICN room, that would be interactive meetings, we did generate some revenue from that in the past, but that's not there anymore. We do still use the ICN as our internet service provider in part, and we're also using Waverly Utilities now too.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So is there a chance that the ICN would be done away with at some point in time then, as long as you're using Waverly Utilities?
There's a chance of that, yeah. We're under contract with the ICN for maybe another year.
Okay.
We had signed on a multi-year contract for a certain rate,
Okay.
certain amount of bandwidth.
All right, very good, thank you.
Yep.
There have been discussions at the state level of selling the ICN
Yeah.
to start with, which makes us nervous to want to lock that down and continue anyway, because what happens if that happens? And it's been brought up again this year as a possibility. So
What's ICN stand for?
Iowa Communications.
yeah, it's a very robust network. It's been built, but I don't think it's really utilized to the capacity it could be.
It's
And
been-
that's why it's been offered up to maybe sell it. And so who knows if it would even be here in another year, unfortunately.
It's
depending
been
on what
around,
happens.
it's been around for several years. It was one of the first statewide internet services that was offered.
Absolutely.
For schools and libraries and stuff to try to have access for.
So if, I think maybe now is the time to get into the utility billing side of things and see where we're at.
As we kind of talked about earlier, regardless of what you do, whether utilities stay or go, you still have a $200,000 problem that we will tackle. I think the first discussion I'd like to have at least is what are your thoughts about utility billing going to Waverly Utilities versus keeping it in-house, as electrical is leaving no matter what?
Can I maybe reframe the discussion just a little bit?
Sure.
Because we have a couple items that are new, and this is a removing from the budget, but we also have a couple things that are adding to that are similarly costs, both the vegetation management and the HR.
Correct.
Again, are things that are new, and I'm wondering, cost-wise with those, you know, not adding them this year, again, because we've got the budget constraints, if how much of a hit that is pushing those back a year. I know it's putting HR back on your shoulders for another year, but
Not a big deal.
just for the additional cost, now we're talking about removing personnel in the billing side of it and adding personnel on these other sides, and I'm not sure, you know.
But isn't that a common practice to reallocate based on need, whether it be private or public? I mean, we see it,
Yeah, but at the same
different
time,
corporations.
it's kind of, you know, we're in a tight budget, so we're gonna add a couple personnel and cut a couple.
Even if you don't add the other personnel, if utilities would go to Waverly
Yeah.
Utilities, we'd be reducing personnel anyway,
still have to talk
because
about that, but I
the
just-
jobs are gone, the duties are gone, and we can't have somebody here with nothing to do, just paying them to be
Right.
here.
Right.
So I don't disagree
I'm
at
just
all,
thinking of
but.
the optics of adding a couple personnel while we're cutting a couple personnel elsewhere, and some of that just,
Well, and I guess, in all due respect, I don't see it in that same light. I see it as putting it in a box as what departmental needs are there, be it or each department in a sense. I don't like to frame it as a total, we're adding, we're taking away, because that's not equivalent to what we were doing. It is truly, you know, we have a need that we're trying to address with vegetation management. We've identified it community-wide. We've had an HR need for a long time. We're looking at trying to work the school in that part. And then we have a utility issue that may result in a reduction of staff because those duties are no longer needed. I understand the encompassing nature of it and how it affects the budget overall, but I don't like to play one off to the other because that's not really how it was intended to be. We just identified things that we'd like to have considered, and I'm absolutely, let's look at those first and see if there's merit to keeping them, and then address the other, but I like to address them individually because it does all kind of bracket out that way. I don't like to encompass everything together, because it wasn't that we're gonna add this because we can eliminate this. It's not a one-to-one
Right.
reduction. I hate to pair it out that way publicly as well, that it was a one-to-one, this is why we're able to do this. We were wanting these regardless of whatever happened here, regardless of if utilities would have took away billing or not, we still would have had these in the budget to consider.
think
So
the-
it was not a,
I'm
Net
just
of
looking
that.
at an overall big picture of, as a council, having to justify the budget, and it's, you know, pretty evident that we're gonna have to raise rates a little bit this year to cover.
we'll see.
We'll see how what we can do, but some of that also is then answering the questions to the public. Well, you raised ours, but you cut here, and you added these new positions, and
Absolutely.
all of that kind of encompassing as a whole. I agree, we need to look at, you know, if billing is gonna move, if that's the best option for the city, most reasonable option, then yeah, that kind of drives the decision on personnel. If that's the way we want to go, that kind of is driven.
Absolutely.
And those other two we need to look at additionally. I'm just saying, from a council, I still think we have to keep the big picture in mind of all of these kind of things to look at with that. But back to the billing, I guess the discussion for me on the billing is that the best thing for the city? I brought up last week, you know, some of the public who runs these services, and if all the billing is coming out of Waverly Utilities, does that leave a perception in the public that they're running the things, you know, and that they're getting burdened with having to answer questions about why things are getting fixed or not getting fixed, or why sewer rates are going up or not, or we get into the situation of, why do we get to control the sewer and solid waste rates, set those, but we can't set the utility rates, but all the billing comes from them. And so that gets to that confusion, some of that we had last fall with, who's in charge of what.
I think we need to look at the big picture, right? And the beauty of local government is you have flexibility to allocate where you need it and take away where it's not needed anymore, whether that's through modernization or different needs of the city. And I mean, we do have difficult decisions, but I don't think we should be on the defensive about it. I mean, our job is to figure out how to invest the money we have into what's going to make the city run more efficiently and stay modern and not get stagnant. And so I think, you've identified that we need an HR person, and most businesses of this size have HR. And so I think for me, that's a very needed department. I think one of the things that they do is they help negotiate, they help figure out policies, they allow you then to focus on things that you need to be doing as the administrator, right? And so, and TAB certainly, it looks like, has put a lot of thought into the vegetation management position. There's a lot of details to be worked out, I think, about who's going to do what, and can the Public Works and Leisure still work together, when person power is needed in certain areas. They all help out each other, and they work really seamlessly, it seems like. And so I think there's details to work out. But it's more of a big picture thing, and how can we do have the ability to be flexible at this level and be more nimble as the needs change, so.
Absolutely.
Well, and I really think that consolidating the bill payment, the idea of having people here and people at Waverly Utilities both, in essence, doing the same thing, it would be so much more efficient just to consolidate that billing. And as a consumer, I prefer fewer bills to more bills. I'm not going to get too uptight about, who's choosing what. I mean, from my perspective, it's paying the bill. I would like one bill, rather than getting into the whole, who's setting this rate, who's setting that rate, who do I go to call when I've got a problem. I just like the one bill thing.
And it's all the city. I mean, I think part of the problem is people don't see Waverly Utilities as part of the city, and it is. It's just basically a different division, but it is city-owned. And so I agree with Brian. I think, it offers so much more convenience, credit card payments, electronic billing. And then, maybe you make one more phone call if you have a question about your bill. But I don't see it as any different. It's just going to be centered at a different building.
But I would hope they would gain the knowledge to answer the questions that
Yeah,
we have there.
sure.
That's part of their role in this, is to be able to have the customer
Right.
service to answer it. And
Right.
if they can't, then that's something they're going to have to address as well internally, because we will be out of that picture, so to speak, once that occurs. And they will have to answer and address those questions.
That would be my concern, is that the citizens know
Who to
that they
call.
can get a response from someone when they call that has a knowledge of the situation or of each of the departments and
Right.
things. So if we choose to transfer everything over to utilities, then if we're going to send the personnel, it should be one that is acquainted with that, and instead of starting from scratch with a new person. But
And that might mean just putting more info on the website and
Yeah.
putting info on your bill about, if you have a question about your water service, here's the number, or here's who you talk to, and here's who you email, whatever.
Right. And it'll be a single number somebody will call. It will not be two numbers here, there. It'll be, that's your number, that's your call. That's where your answer is going to come from.
And I guess I was
Shopping.
concerned about that too, just as the mayor was, but, the billing questions, the billings are being consolidated, and someone has a question that's dealing with billings, it makes sense to call one place. And even now, if there is a substantive question about a repair issue or a water issue or something that's more of a technical issue, that doesn't go to billings anyway. I mean, that's going to go to the department that handles that. My my thoughts on this is that what we need to look at is how can we best serve the people of Waverly? And if it's better to serve the people of Waverly by having these billings being separate, then that's what we do. I think that it really is going to be more efficient and better for people if they're getting a consolidated billing. And also, I really like the technological aspects of this, things that can be done on this new system. I would prefer that all be done here at the city, but since the utilities has already made that decision that they're doing it, they've kind of forced our hand on it. So I think that it makes some sense to go ahead and consolidate that.
Especially if they're going to allow us to join them in that without extra fees.
Well,
Just
we're going to
providing the
pay.
employee.
There's going to be a transfer
Yeah,
cost.
employee, right?
Or a fee of some sort, whether it's one of our employees or someone from the outside or whatever it may be, whoever they have or whatever they charge us to do the deal, we will have
Right.
to get with them on that. But there will be a charge for them to do our billing, just as we were charging them to do their billing. It really just flipping roles. But yeah, I don't know that it'll be this employee, that I don't know. That's for them to kind of figure out. But whoever it is, there will be a fee back to us that may be close to equivalent or something along the line. We'll have to discuss that and maybe negotiate that out as well. What does that look like? Multi-year or a single year? What is the agreement, so to speak?
But it makes sense to do this now when they're just getting their software set up, so we don't have to, wait a year and then they have to redesign everything, so.
I mean, I've certainly had some of the thoughts that Tim kind of shared about, we want to be sensitive to the people that this affects, but when it comes down to what our role is, I think we've talked about the right things. We need to figure out what's best financially for all parties, how it affects the serviceability of it. And in today's age with Google, if I've got a water issue, I'm going to Google City of Waverly, find the water department. If I've got a billing question, I'm going to call the number that's on my statements. I think the public will not see this as a big change, but I know I voiced the opinion last week that if we do transfer our billing over there, we should treat it as a service that we pay for versus we'll just move a staff person over there and continue to pay their wages.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree.
So that would be my suggestion, or my input is we decide what services should transfer over there, figure out what that's going to cost us to purchase, and then figure out what services we don't need staff for because of that change, and then let the personal impact of that kind of fall out from those decisions, and then work with the staff that are affected by it for transition, or however we look at severance, separation costs, those type of things.
It's too early to have a net figure on the results of revenues, income or expenses yet then.
Not exactly. I mean, we know if staff are affected, what those costs are, what it would be, what it not be. The big question now is, do you move utilities or not? That's what fosters the rest of the equation going forward, because it does have an impact on, are you able to offset that cost internally or not?
Would
Period.
that be
Is that part of the
a
budget
resolution that
decision?
needs to come to us, since we can't make decisions necessarily today?
I don't know how you want to accomplish that. I mean, we have to move forward in some manner, unless you put on a formal
that
vote
part
for
of the-
this, which is going to be the 19th, unless we try and rush it in for Monday, or have a special meeting. By then, we're past budget to get done in the first place. So
We're about
we do need
locked.
to have some decision as to what are we going to do? And we talked about as staff do we try to put on items to vote on specifically during these sessions? We really have never done that. So I don't know if we can do that by consensus. Can we get some direction? Because the ultimate budget in the end is March 6th, Thursday hearing. That's the final vote of the entire budget. It sits. And again, we can reduce at that point. We just can't go up. So that's kind of where we want to look at it. I mean,
But we would have to have a resolution or something for the agreement with Waverly Utilities.
yes. Before July 1st, something would have to be worked out, as that would be the implementation date.
We wouldn't
And we would have it long before then.
We wouldn't have to have that resolution voted on before the budget. We would probably have to have the agreement so we know the cost that goes into it.
We would have to find out what the cost is. That's correct.
Bill, do you have an opinion on whether we could legally act on something today?
My thought is that this is a personnel decision that the administrator really has charge of, because those are the positions that he would fill and not fill. I mean, and so it really becomes, but he wants direction from you, obviously, on what works, but I think that's a,
Makes a difference.
yeah.
Depending on which way utilities goes, does make somewhat of a difference in how you would staff accordingly.
Sure. My opinion is we should consolidate it and move it.
Would agree.
Yeah, I think we have consensus there.
I think from the legal standpoint, we don't necessarily have the ability to vote on anything
Correct.
individually, but we can give a general consensus to the administrator.
Guidance.
That's all I'd want, so that we can get somewhere to a hearing that reflects
And make the adjustment.
what we're doing.
That's appropriate.
Okay?
Yeah.
So, again, I want to be sensitive to this does have impact to individuals, but
Yes.
having made that consensus opinion, does that then soften the $200,000 loss that we got from providing the service to them to the tune of it's only a $50,000 impact, those type of things? or-
The 200,000, again, if we're going to move utilities to Waverly Utilities, and there are at least a couple positions that are pretty much 100% utility-driven, and another position is partial, and then you have a supervisory position over this area that would not be supervising anybody there. So there are things that are impacted. So if you look at eliminating the positions that are generally impacted, I think it would be, when talking to Jennifer, there was basically a full-time position needed to accomplish what would be your payables, receivable, your payroll, those kind of things. If the HR position stays in as well, it has a role in the benefit side of this as well, which is more appropriate in a sense. Organizations I've been in prior and have seen where your benefits are monitored by your HR and then executed by your payroll. And it's not usually all together in one encompassing position. So you would need a full-time position other than Jennifer to cover the remaining items that are left from the utilities. And it's my opinion that that would be the only position you would need, is a full-time position.
To assist her. with
To assist her
payroll
and to, because when you look at structurally around the rest of the departments in the city, you will have a specialist or you have a second in command or something along that line. And we don't necessarily have that with Jennifer in finance when it comes to budget and audit and things like that. There's pieces in every little part, but there is not a true, if she's gone or sick or something, this is who picks up that and goes. We don't have anything like that there. And that's concerning from the sense of what that is, especially this time of year. If something were to occur, unfortunately, to Jennifer, what would we do? Who would have that knowledge to back that up or have that? There's parts and pieces that would be able to, but again, most other departments, when you look around, you have a specialist, you have a certain person that's behind that. I don't have that, but that's why you're here as counsel. You would step in, if I was gone, you would take care of everything in a sense with those staff, and the police chief would gladly step in behind me. So, but that is, in all seriousness, what I see it as, is you need a full-time position there. But when the other duties are gone, there's not as much need for the other department positions that are there. Two of them are completely related to utilities. One is looking at retirement already. And then you have the supervisory position that, again, when that portion's gone, the utilities is gone, is that able to be implemented into a single position with the accounts payable receivable? And I believe it is. When the Tantalus system came on and we stopped doing the meter reading out in the public per se, there was a reduction in hours needed for that as well. We just didn't make any changes. So the combination of this on top of that, I do think there is room to put a single position in there that will accomplish what we need. I think it's worth attempting to try and do that. If we ever had to add a part-time later or something like that, you could certainly do that. But at this point in time, based on what we've seen, I think a single position is what we're going to need going forward in their full-time position. And then you'd have HR partially here if that continues through, depending on what we do. And even without that, I still think there's probably enough with a full-time position, and then Jennifer as well. And we have other staff in the area that have things that can pick up pieces as well, in a sense, too. We can reallocate out a lot of these things. And I think we're always afraid of doing that, but we need to probably look at piecing some of this out regardless, so you have a separation of duties as well. Because when you have a small staff and everybody has this one thing everybody has it doing, that's not always your best fit either. Even from an audit standpoint, there's a lot of times we get hit with, you got to have someone else do that because that needs to be a separation. I do like to disperse accordingly if need be, and I think we have the staff that can accomplish that.
So can we look at that section of our binder again and tell us what the impact then would be? And I can't remember what color.
Is it
Absolutely.
purple?
It's the purple one towards the end here.
Like the second purple?
I'm not sure how many purples we have. It's right before Health and Social Services.
Financial
That was going to be
administration.
my question with that is, I don't remember on the budgets, we often get hit with the oversight because of the small staff that we have. So-
And that's common in a lot of municipalities, and they try to address that with disbursement of certain duties, et cetera, to get them from being consolidated with others, so that is common.
County, there we are.
So it's the financial administration purple?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so you have, the HR position is part of this.
Still in here at this point.
Jennifer is not. Is she in a is her salary in a separate,
It's in here.
it's in here too? Okay.
Yeah, when you look at the org chart on the very first page, after myself, you have 5 individuals, and then HR would be a 6th one. I think if HR stayed in, you could go do 3 individuals. Jennifer, HR, and then another individual doing the encompassing role of whatever would be remaining for duties.
So you'd have Jennifer, you'd have an HR person, and of these 4, they'd be
One
consolidated into a
full-time body.
single.
Because the
Okay.
meter reader is basically 100% utility driven. The
Okay.
billing clerk is 100% utility driven. You see with the other position, you have a meter reader portion in there that takes a piece out of that. And then the supervising of all those individuals, I don't know that we need a person to supervise one person to supervise one person. That seems a little bit redundant when we have staff that are supervising many more than that equally as directors. So that is where we see that happening.
But yeah, so basically these 4 people would be consolidated into a single person, and then you'd have another person, not in that same chain of command, but being the human
In that
resources.
department.
Right.
Okay.
That's how I would see that, yes.
Yeah, I had a question on the HR, where that fits in your flow chart on the.
I still think,
Report directly to you.
Jennifer's job description is to oversee benefits, et cetera. I still think that person would report under her. They can report to me. Either way, I'm fine with it. It's whatever Jennifer would want as well, but it would be a resource for her dotted line if it wasn't completely reporting to her. So either way, I don't have an issue with that.
Just so I,
Council we have in the back of our binders, there's the
Orange sheet with all
orange
the,
sheet has all the personnel that could pull. The very last page of that has the, so you can see the positions.
for my clarity, I guess, when I look at salaries, benefits, those type of things, that number basically is covering 6 positions.
Yes, that's correct.
And if we proceed down the path that we've kind of decided, we will reduce that to 3.
That's correct.
So round numbers, 50% of that. Give or take a little.
Yeah, and
40%
then you'd have to factor out what we're gonna be charged by utilities as well. Conservatively, when I look at a couple positions being eliminated, I come up with about $130,000 reduction. That's a number I would put out there. That would be the supervisory position and part of the meter reading position, because we're talking property tax, and a portion of that goes to water, sewer, solid waste as well. So we had to factor that out of it. It isn't just a clean, this is that much. About half of that accounts towards that. As far as the billing clerk, again, that position would not be here, but that's where I start getting, okay, how much is that going to cost? Is that going to be equivalent to what we may pay there? I don't want to count on that just in case, because we don't know what that fee is going to be from utilities yet, if that would occur. So I've almost set that aside as a what if without counting on it, because I don't want us to count on it and all of a sudden that's not the case. So we can try and find that out even as quick as Monday or something before the budget meeting Monday night to finalize that. But conservatively, if you left that out, the other 2 positions factored out would be about 130,000 roughly.
And I know again, in my mind, the HR position is a needed position. There's just that question, if we step into it, does it need to be a full-time now? Can we, even if we can't partner with another entity, can we?
I would back that off then, honestly, getting to that, as I looked through it last night again, I would take $40,000 off of that figure, because I think if we go the school system and they are to factor and partner with us, it would be about 40% is what they thought they could use, so it'd be 3 days to us, 2 days to them, or however you figured out the mixture. If we can't get that to happen, then I would want to find either a contracted dollar amount for that from another agency, or we would reduce that further if need be, but I would not want to go in any higher than, 60,000 roughly for that total piece of it that we would end up paying. Whether it be contracted, whether it be part-time, whether it be shared, I would want to reduce that by 40,000 as well.
I guess I would personally be a little more comfortable taking that route than trying to hire a full-time position, not knowing exactly.
Right.
If we
Yeah, if we
would
can't
need
get it worked out.
If we need the
before
capacity or something.
July 1, then I think that's what we will do. We'll find that.
The figure you had in here for HR, was that a full-time?
Yes,
HR? Okay.
yes. Kind of a worst case, if we had to go it alone, what would that look like for us? Because at the time we were talking, we weren't 100% sure, and we're still not necessarily 100% sure, but I know there's a definitely interest in wanting to do that. It's just, can it all get worked out in the meantime? And so that's where, again, I think 40,000, removing that is reasonable.
And that would leave you the capacity for 60%.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we can certainly get someone for that to assist. If it's for a partial year, full year, we can do that.
So that's in
not-
addition to the 130,000 you
Yes.
said? Okay. And so what do you envision, James, that the HR person would do? And what would be still left to other individuals to manage?
The HR person, and we'd have to get a little better job description somewhat on that. The ones that, I would see in the past deal with would be obviously personnel-related issues. They would have a part of negotiations, which may lessen the cost of our attorney fees that we use for some of those pieces as well. That has to do some of that for us. I can't promise it would 100%, but that would be our goal, is to lessen some of that also. You would have some of the training that we may be lacking in areas, whether it be assisting with safety or OSHA, or you have your FMLA, you have all these things that we have consultants that do for us now, as well as try to do some of it internally. The biggest issue I had when I came here is that we do HR by committee. There's multiple individuals throughout the city to have a piece or portion of it that they do. I don't know that that's our best approach, because are you staying current on your training? You're up to speed with the latest regulations. I mean, there should be a body that is designated to do just that, especially when you look at the issues that can come up and the financial penalties that can occur from being wrong in some of these things. I'd feel much better if we had someone that actually was a specialist in that area, instead of us trying to just stay up with it as we can. And even when we bring in assistants from other places to help us, you have to bring them up to speed. It takes a while to do that. Instead of being here, knowing what's happening, being more familiar with the situation internally, than trying to step in from the outside and try and fix it quickly. And that's been, effective, but it's just not the most efficient thing for us to do.
How much do you think that costs to contract out all that?
We'd have to look into it. I don't know. Right now, it's kind of an as needed. If something occurs, we try to bring someone in, usually from the Excel group, and been very helpful, wonderful group to deal. It's getting them up to speed in a hurry and having these decisions made without really maybe having the full historical background of what's been happening.
Well,
It's problematic.
it would obviously give the employees a sense of consistency
Yes, yes,
across the board instead of,
And a go-to person.
absolutely. And that's what we want to have as well, is someone that can truly function in that capacity. And if we have issues, whether it be with my directors, myself, you as council, someone removed from that completely is nice to have that to be able to talk to as well. And that's something we don't have that right now. And it makes things a little muddy. It makes issues that do come up, which thankfully, we do have very few issues like that occur at all. But going forward, you can't always predict how it's going to be. I just know at our size, I've talked to other companies that do HR benefits, things like that. We're at a size where we need at least a half-time person. They've all been very consistent about that, if not a full-time, depending on our training needs and a lot of those items. So partnering with the schools was a great mix. They also have that similar kind of a role, and so even if that doesn't occur, I'd still like to get a part-time or, again, contract a company in, a definite more focused hours inside type of thing instead of just as we need them. I'd want more boots on the ground here versus just, call them if something occurs, so.
And I think for staff, it'd be more acceptable to work with another city employee versus an outsider that just comes in and that type of thing. So.
Okay. So I guess, without knowing what utilities is gonna do, I don't know how much further, as far as a fee, I don't know how much further I really wanna go with that right now. I mean, we've established $170,000 reduction right now. There are items in the budget, whether it be capital or things of that nature. Again, 22,000 was already removed from leisure services from their items. I do want to take a look at a couple of those things to kind of try to figure out how we can reduce this a little further, if that's the council's pleasure. And I guess that's maybe the question at hand now is, we're at a 1484 rate. This would drop it to, God, what would that be? I don't know. I'll have to figure that out. At the top of my head, I can't process the parts and the pieces and the,
Again, I guess when I see these numbers and I see what 20th Street cost is, to me, it's getting to be a wash.
it can be. And that's kind of my ultimate goal when we started into this was to, I guess my own personal look at this was to bring this levy down to the point where the only increase was due to a capital project, or even that was only a partial increase, partially because of a capital project. Last year when the budget was finalized, we were able to keep things flat, and then there was an increase as we decided to go forward and bond for Champions Ridge. Now, obviously, it's not why the budget went up. It's just was one of the factors that we did or did not have to decide to do. I see 20th Street and, the Park Project, Cedar Lane, those are similar in that nature to where if operationally we can hold our debt where it is and operationally stay within our confines, then if above and beyond that is due to a project or something we want to accomplish, I don't have as much issue with that because you can identify this is where we decided to increase it. We were here, and there it was. Now, if we can bring it down further to encompass part of that into that, I think that's possible too. And I think depending on the cuts that are made and the money is allocated, it could be possible to bring it down enough to bring 20th Street in without an increase at all. It's just, if what I think is what you think, and it's that whole kind of a measure, and again, eliminate some things that maybe we do want to, maybe we don't want to. But in the end, it's how far do you want to swing the levy down to accommodate room for these projects? So I don't know, do we want to get into the projects now? Do we want to go back through the budget, or do you have a levy rate in mind by chance? That's where it's really hard to start to identify how far do you want to go. We can go down as far as we want. I've always been a proponent of that. We can cut the budget till there's no tax increase every single year. It's simple math. We can teach elementary kids to do it. It's this minus this. The hard part is where do you stop, and what's the ripple effect if you don't, and what's the ripple effect if you do? Where do you end up? And that's the key goal. It's not hard cutting budgets. It's what's responsible and what is going to be impactful, and that's where you have to find that line. So
I guess that's what I see our role is. I certainly don't have a tax rate in mind, right? Maybe because I'm a novice at this, but I sort of have a picture, I think, of what projects I think are good for the city and are essential. I mean, Mike's been very helpful, I think, in helping us see this is a must-do project, this is a dream project, whatever. But I think that you make cuts where you can, but we also want to make sure, I was impressed, I think, with how lean the budgets are. The budgets really didn't change much, except if there was a expensive piece of equipment that's needed or health insurance costs, which seems to drive a lot of the increase. And so you can make cuts, but you don't want to cut things that keep our city a quality city.
right.
And then I think it would be great if the expenditures that we want to go above are those projects that we decide are the best and should not be delayed any further, whatever they end up to be.
The revenue stream for the 20th Street project, one of them is state grants for about $280,000. Is that railroad funds, or is that outside of,
I believe
what's
that's
the
the
contribution?
railroad
Is that the
funding.
contribution from the railroad?
It's actually state funding for the crossing gates and signals.
Okay.
There was a little bit of federal as well. I mean, it was all kind of other monies for, but again, it's the crossing gate signals, it's not. the-
Yeah, and I'll have to go back and check the agreements, but that money may not even flow through the city, because I think that the railroad company is going to perform the work, and so that money would go, I think, straight to the railroad from the state, and then our contribution be 10%. Wanted to show the total package of the work that was being done.
But our bond we're proposing is about $1.6 million, I think is what we're looking at for roughly, yeah. That's where the 40 cents would come in, roughly about 40 cents for that.
So that,
I want to continue to be sensitive of staff, impact, that type of thing, but if I understand what you've brought forward has a 2.8% raise.
Correct.
Across the board.
That's correct.
I guess when I look at what the private sector has been doing for raises the last couple of years, I think that is on the higher end, I guess. And I know you've made a comment last week that bringing that down a few percentage point doesn't make a huge impact, but
Tell you exactly what that is, though. We did go back and do that. I know Edie requested it. If you drop it 0.3 for non-bargaining, the non-union, it's $4,300. That is the difference from 2.8 to 2.5, down to 2.2 is another 4,300, and so on. So that's, you can figure out how much the drop is
The
for
total,
all of the non-bargaining. Because the police
Non-bargaining.
unit is set, that's what the 2.8 is. The city unit, if you do something equivalent, again, this has to be negotiated, but the 2.8 to 2.5 is a couple $1,000s, because when you look at the total union, a lot of those individuals are in water, sewer, solid waste, they're not taxed, they're fee-driven. And so it does not have the impact that we would think it would, because there's only a handful that are really in the actual property tax portion of the budget. And so that's what that would look like, but I understand what you're saying.
But again, those raises do impact service fees that are being paid, so.
They do,
again,
absolutely.
Needing to balance public perception through what is really, what we need to do to keep and attract good quality employees is when the public sees a 2.8% raise, that raises some questions, concerns.
And I don't disagree at all, and I only mentioned the taxable portion, because a lot of times people say, well, if you just reduce this, it'll cut my taxes. That isn't exactly true. Only a fraction of that portion is tax-related, non-bargaining. Not everyone here as well is tax-related. Even, some of the directors, they're not in the tax part of this. They're in the other fees. So that's why we want to get a dollar amount for what truly would impact the property tax rate, knowing as well, yes, the fees are driven, et cetera, and that also has an impact too. But, it's whatever council decides they'd like to go ahead with. We just put in the rate equivalent to where the contract settled was as well as a starting point. So I don't know if there's other comments, discussions, if there's a number in mind you have to bring that to instead of 2.8 or, any of that. It's wide open for whatever council wants to do.
In that executive session, on Monday to talk about.
Negotiations, we certainly can there.
well,
It's
and
not
even
something
if,
we want to do in open session right now.
Well, but non-bargaining,
even with
You
the
have to set that in
2.8
a sense, or I
increase
do.
for the fee-driven, they're not increasing their fees.
right.
So they're able to manage the pay increases without increasing people's rates.
Within that fund, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, non-bargaining, I mean, it's open. Everything about us is open, from our wages to what we make everything. So that certainly can be discussed and determined right now if you'd like, or at a different point. But absolutely, it's, I understand what you're saying completely, and it's well within whatever council would like to do.
Yeah, I
Certainly
know
adjust.
When I first got on in maybe 09, 010, there was the zero increase for all of the non-bargaining. Can't remember. We had
Is it right in there,
We
staff?
held it 10 or 11. So it was like a couple of year budgets that we didn't do anything, just the 1 year? Okay. Just remember that from back then. We did that once.
Right.
And
And that's why I just wanted to provide you the dollar amounts, the impact that you can certainly, like I said, whatever you want to do is, we're absolutely fine with it.
I've just got two comments on this. Basically, when you're looking at setting compensation for the non-bargaining people, the first thing you want to look at is what are the inflationary factors that we're dealing with. And a number of years ago, inflation was at or very close to zero. So if you're trying to keep people in general at the same purchasing level that they had before, you want to be very close to what the base inflation rate is, which right now is about 2.5% to 3%. So a 2.8% hits that pretty closely. And the second thing is if the bargaining units are receiving compensation increase, you want to make sure that the non-bargaining units are not falling behind. And if we start making a decision that we're not going to keep those relatively equal, I mean, they don't have to be exactly the same, but relatively equal, then a couple of years down the road, we'll see the non-bargaining units that are really falling behind, and then we have to start kicking in a lot more to get them up there. So I would rather see small, ongoing increases that are, fairly close to what the base inflation rate is, and do that on an annual basis. So I don't really have a problem with, 2.8. I think that's a legitimate number.
I agree.
Well, we can sit tight on it again if you think through it, depending where it all ends as well. We have Monday as well to discuss further, and we can take even more action then in a sense, but.
Again, as you stated, it can be factored in at this point, and as long as it doesn't increase, we can.
That's correct.
Make the adjustment.
And a lot of that, and we won't get real deep into this, but the state forms that we talk about and the categories that we deal in, and we had the pie chart up earlier last time. I should have brought that again. I don't think I have it, but they categorize different groups, like police, fire, and ambulance are in their own group, public safety. And then they have, health and human services, and they have debt, and they have all these different categories. As long as none of those categories go up, even, it has to be that distinct, then you're fine. You can always go down at hearing. We just can't go up. You can raise and lower within them completely without an issue at all, but the net cannot increase at hearing. So you're absolutely right. Things could be, again, taken care of March 6th even. There could be some adjustments made then. So.
But we're dealing with, if I remember right, and my memory fails me frequently, for every $100,000 plus or minus, we're talking about 25 cents in debts or in.
On the levy?
On the levy.
Yes, sir, you're correct.
So I have a note that I've come up with over the weekend sometime looking through the budget. If somewhere primarily in the general fund, I guess where it would come from, $250,000 to $300,000 would get us down, at least we could maintain the levy that was from last year. And so I don't, you've talked about roughly $200,000 already in possibility of personnel costs with the change in billing. So I don't know if we can find another $50,000 to $100,000 in the general fund, because most of the projects that are proposed are paid for with funds other than than general levy funds.
Right.
And
20th Street and Cedar Lane and the park improvements, those are all taxable items that would increase it. But otherwise, the park if we are able to factor that in, and we'll get into that capacity here in a little bit. That, Adams Parkway Bridge, water, absolutely. Those are all non-property tax at this time.
so what?
And the other portion to bring up too, before we get out of accounting, is that move then would probably drop another 10,000 in postage, because most of our postage is utility driven. We have 13 in there. I'd take 10 out of that, honestly, and reduce that as well, to make that about 180,000 reduction then total.
I mean, I guess I've always kind of made it a commitment that, since I've been on the council, is to keep that levy constant. Now, I know because of rollbacks and what I try to tell people is if we can keep our budgets in line, their investment in their property appreciates. Well, yeah, they're going to pay a little bit more even if we keep the levy flat. But to me, should be the goal, is property appreciation. So when I saw that the first number here, where it had jumped 70 cents, that caused me to pause a little bit. Is this a good time to do some of these projects, those type of things?
Right.
Rolling that back to what we've talked about here, again, it gets us to a fairly flat. Now, I think we've made the commitment to the folks out in Eisenach to do 20th. So I think we've identified some numbers here that make that fit in the 1470. I think the folks that use Cedar Lane have been waiting a long, long time, even longer than the Eisenach folks, for that to be addressed.
Yep.
So I'm getting to the point where I would not be uncomfortable with a slight increase, again, knowing some of the other things that are coming online for next year. We've got fairly large building projects, condominiums out behind the high school, we've got some commercial. So again, I think we may see a bump here, but maybe next year, we certainly won't have to bump it again type thing.
I would hope not. And again, the rollback impacted some this year. When that goes up, again, it's good for us, but then taxes also go up. So the thing that I don't like to get into in a sense is, you know, if the rollback decreases, even if you raise the rate a little bit, it still keeps taxes fairly about the same. Because in the next year, if the rollback goes up, then we want to blame that for why taxes went up. So we can't have it both ways. We try to fund what we think we need to fund, and the rate is what it is. And if we think it's still too high, we don't like the looks of it for whatever reason, then we try to find other things to remove to bring that down even further. And there are certainly other things we've identified that we can talk through to possibly look at removing as well. We got still a pretty good list of where we can go to see what do we want to do, what do we not want to do. So I do think there are some areas that we can probably do without some certain things. We just cut out and different funds that we can pull from as well to maybe lessen this burden. And I'm more than happy to run through those if you want to at least listen to consider and then comment accordingly, if that's where we want to go. Or we can jump into capacity and look at the debt projects first as well and what that looks like to kind of demonstrate when we're talking about capacity, how do we really know if we can afford it or not? We can do that too. So which avenue do you want to kind of proceed with?
I'd like to do departments first, I think, since we've been on it,
Okay.
and then move to
Is that,
projects. But
we okay
that's
with
just-
that?
I was kind of going the opposite. Let's figure out which are the capital project, or at least order the capital projects that this is our first one, this is our second. And if we have to then pull, we pull from the bottom and pull away to get to a level and go back to the departments to see what the projects are we want to do, where they hit, and then start pulling away to get us back to where we want to be at, I guess.
Either way, absolutely.
I would agree with Dan, both Eisenach and Cedar Lane folks. We've been talking about getting those fixed for a couple of years. I guess looking at what we've got going on right now, the Cedar Lane one is the one I think can be pushed, probably out of necessity to push it back a year and just cross our fingers that it doesn't completely deteriorate on us. But with Bremer Avenue being under construction and doing the Adams Parkway Bridge,
Definitely a timing
having
issue.
Cedar River Cedar Lane in there at the same time, that's like, would totally block off access to a lot of that.
Yeah, we would have to time it out to where we didn't do one without the other, and depending where the project went. And, because, you know, the Bremer Avenue will be done this fall, in the first half of fiscal, 19, 19.
Yeah.
Forget my own budget, where we're at, 19. Spring construction, you could alternate the two and get them done then after the fact, if need be, once that project's completed. So it could be done, it's just timing. It's alternating timing. Yeah, if we want to get into the projects and look at capacity, we can do that. If we want to go departmentally,
Doesn't matter.
thoughts?
I'm going to defer to the people that have been through this before as to what has worked well, so.
Well, I don't know if anything ever worked well. It's just, at some
What do you
point, we
want?
hit it all.
What works for you? What do you want to do?
Let's get off of this for a minute. Let's go play on the computer for a little bit.
Okay.
We'll get into capacity, because we talk about it a ton, but it's never really been something that we can demonstrate as to why.
And talk slow, James, when you go through this. For those of us who are new, please.
I will. I will pull it all the way down here, as Cliff directed me to do, so that we have this. So if you look at your screens.
They're all leaving, James.
We
People
need
are
a 5-minute
together.
coffee.
This spreadsheet is something that Public Financial Management had done for quite a while, and they wouldn't give it to us, so we created it anyway. And when you talk about capacity, a lot of what you're looking at, and there is a lot of columns here that we have hidden, which we'll undo for you. It's like opening a secret vault or something. Yeah, there's a lot more. We factor in the 1% growth. As we've talked about before, we can borrow up to 5% of the, that's our legal limit, is 5% of the total value within the city limits that's established by the state. Then the city itself also went and put an 80% limit on that number. So when we approach our limit, I'm talking about our 80% limit. I'm not talking about our legal 100% limit. We still have a lot more beyond that. We just don't get into that if we can avoid it. So again, we have a legal limit or self-imposed limit, and this is not something I share a lot, so you should be glad you're getting to see this. We factor in the taxes that are outstanding from various projects, whether it be rebates or TIF, enterprise funds, local option, the debt against that, sales tax, the sales tax increment funding, rebate agreements, et cetera. All that is factored into this, and that's why it's locked in. We're not doing any more of that going forward right now, so I don't keep it shown there. So
And the sales tax, again, is funding,
the Dry Run Creek was a still tax, the STIF, sales tax increment financing, that was in the, one of the forms that you have there. So, this mouse is just not wanting to cooperate here. This column here is last year's bond. So we know what we're doing in principal each year as it goes out, and that's listed here. We have the various fiscal years. So in 18, the only one that we did was that bond. And we go through, again, all the different projects we talk about. We have them tried to factor them in here and try to blend them in so that they fit. As you see Green Bridge, we've had to push that off for a number of years. That's not final by any means, but as we have not discussed, we need to kind of continue to look at projects as we go forward and see how that's going to go. Parkway, we have 9.25 million, and there's an estimate. If it's more, if it's less, it's going to affect what else we can do. I had to, where were there at 2 point, I need to get that back to 1.6. I think that's the actual. Okay. And then we have first phase of Cedar Lane. You know, initially we'd push it out a year or two. Again, it's as simple as increasing, deleting the roadway portion, which is the second part of 20th. And we just start going across the board. These are all the different projects we've been talking about. You know, the water bond, it's not a capacity issue because it's done with fees. So we don't have to worry about that in this particular process. The Dairy Queen to Burger King, that's probably going to be a higher number than it sits there. At the time, we thought it was about $750,000. So the columns in yellow are the ones we have to do. Those are the payments to DOT for Bremer Avenue. And again, we've got estimates in that we need to do. You have the Public Works Building, the second phase of 20th Street, and the third phase. You have Memorial Park, the renovations there. All these projects, we just keep adding and adding, and then eventually you have a summary of what we have outstanding, what's left, what our legal limit is, and this is the 80% we talk about. So when I say 78% right here, that's 78% of the total, not 78% of our self-imposed levy. So that's 78% of the total. So we're staying under our 80% self-imposed levy, and then we put the fiscal year in the other one as well so we can kind of see it. And then that is the portion of our self-imposed levy, which again, we don't really need to worry about that. So what happens then is if we decide that we want to bring Cedar Lane up, and for some reason, a lot of my, this Excel is different.
James, can I ask you a simple
Absolutely.
question? So if we just take one of these, like, if we look at the 20th Street Railroad
Yep.
column there, so that means that we start out with a $1.6 million project, and that's the balance going every year of what we are still paying off?
This is the remaining amount of principal that's on there. So you have to
Okay,
count
so
for
this is all
everything that's left.
proposed, whereas the chart you showed us before, which was all the revenue streams,
Right.
is that a given every year of what we're going to get from those funds? Or, do you see what I mean? This is sort of
which chart?
hypothetical. The one you showed where you expanded and you showed TIF and everything.
Oh, that's all separate.
But I mean, is
Projects
that a given
Yeah.
every year? Okay.
Those are what we know we're going to get from TIF. We know we're going to get from the sales tax increment funding, you know, the enterprise funds, the things that we committed to. You know, the last 2 years of lost bonds were on there because they're about done, and then that would go away unless we enter in another one. So yeah, that's all kind of
Okay.
sunk and done, and unless we add to those, we're not going to do any more. And this is where we get into some of these other projects. So
very conservative in a 1% growth. And
that's
as
what I
a
wanted.
community, we've traditionally seen better than a
Yeah.
1%.
We've averaged 3, 5, 6, 7 years, 8 because of the roll, you know, the equalization orders. We've always stayed at 1 to make sure we didn't get in a jam. Even this year, we went up 1 on the total 100% valuation, but not anymore. And the rollback then took the taxable down, but the total 100% was probably right in there. It was not what we wanted, but it was enough that we did see a slight increase in here. So we try to stay extremely conservative, only factoring in a single percent. So if you take 20th Street and let's say we want to delay it. Oh, this is not what I wanted to see.
Click on home.
There's where I want it. That's why I'm glad you're here. There you go. We'll insert it. Then we can go over and we can say, okay, this is, come on. Here we go. We can see that based on the other projects in, it still works. We don't have any negatives for capacity. But let's say we want to move one up. And this is where it gets to be a little more interesting. Say you want to move Cedar Lane up. We'll go over and we'll say, okay, what does this look like now? We're still good, but not by a lot. And then the years later, we get down as well. So and this is what we do whenever we're talking about we can afford this, we can't afford this. So if we want to do the entire 20th Street as well, let's find one that's going to jam us up here a little bit, if this will continue to work. So let's move up the entire first project from 5th Street all the way past Eisenach. Now we got a problem. That throws us over our capacity estimate by $1.5 million. That one will not fit. And that's kind of how, when we're talking about capacity and what does and doesn't work, this is the chart we pull out, this is what we go through. And again, this is not taxes by any means. This is the legal capacity that we can even borrow if we choose to. Because there's times when you can't do that. And the items that come up often is, depending on how big it gets, we may be fine for 2-3 years, and then you have huge negatives in the years to come because you have other projects that are slated to come on board. Now you can fix that by just delaying them. And some of them, though, that we can't, like the payments to Bremer Avenue. So you have to, again, function into what can we delay, what can we not delay. So when I say to you, we can afford these three, we can afford to borrow for them. I'm not saying that we can afford taxes. That's for you to determine the impact. And as we've talked about, 40 cents, 22 cents, local option TIF. But this is a document that we go to and use to show that, you know, we do have the capacity to do it. And then a lot of people panic about the debt we have. You look out 10 years, we're down to less than 30% of our capacity if we were to hold and only do what we are talking about, you know, as we sit. So if we did no more debt than the projects that are here, we're down to 30% capacity in 10 years. A couple years later, we're 13. I mean, we have a lot of room to go. And that's why when we look at these, we try to blend in project after project based on what we have available and don't have available. And even the rating agencies, they don't like to see us get to our maximum, but our maximum is actually 20% below the real maximum. So intentionally, we stay at that point. We're still not even hitting that. And as long as you have a plan, that rapid repayment occurs 10 years or less, the plan is what they want to see. And if you truly execute your plan and you say you can do what you're going to do, they don't have as big an issue as if this came out of nowhere, now we can't do it, we want to do it, we said we're going to hold it off. That's when they get nervous because they don't see the leadership and the consistency there. So when we talk about bond ratings, et cetera, the consistency is what we're after. And as long as we have a plan, we can demonstrate what we're doing, and it steps down like the charts we had before, you saw the debt dropping off, we're usually in very good shape because of that. So I don't know how much more do you want to see or cover with this? I mean, that's where I can tell you we have capacity to do this or we don't. That's
And
how
you've
we
got
factor.
payments 2 and 3 in there?
Yes, I do.
I couldn't remember.
They occur in, good Lord, come back. Sometimes it gets touchy here.
I think we need to invest in technology in this room, but
I do too. This might be a problem in the
That would be the
chair.
payment 3, the Bramer Avenue, the yellow stuff.
Yeah,
Thank
there it
you.
is.
Let's not touch
There.
this again.
Okay, so it's
that's
in
in
there.
the
Yeah,
fiscal
already
year
included.
20, fiscal year 21. Again, one payment each year going forward, starting in fiscal 19. And again, they're estimates. They're going to ebb and flow depending on what the project cost is when we're done. But this is what we talk about when we say we have capacity or not. And then we factor in, you know, accelerating different projects, have the core one. We have scenarios all the way out so we can track what does and doesn't happen and lock them in instead of just manipulating it and then going forward. But
I mean, I
so
certainly
that's what that looks like.
appreciate this visual. I think, again, past councils have gone through the same process, not maybe as interactive as this, but I think Dick Crane was very good at, with Mike and Tab's help, to do that planning out for us, those type of things. I think Phil took some good steps there. And again, I have to constantly remind myself why we talked about doing something with the dry run until the state's funding came along for the sales tax. We never had a vehicle to do it. So all of a sudden, we had to drop that in somewhat unexpectedly. I kind of look at Bremer Avenue reconstruction that same way. Yeah, we've been pushing the state to do something for years. they kept telling us 5 years out, and then all of a sudden they knock on our door and say, next year. So I think, for me, it's easy to explain why we're where we're at. I think it would have been irresponsible for councils not to have taken advantage of the dry run project, that type of thing. So, again, I'm much more comfortable saying if there is a levy increase, I understand why, and it's for the good of the community, not because of poor management or poor decisions.
Absolutely.
I know you have the Fourth Street project kind of earmarked in there, and that's going to depend a lot on what the DOT decides to do, but are there any other surprise projects that might pop up like the Dry Run did and like Bremer Avenue did that we need to be aware of? So if we're borrowing up to that 80% limit and suddenly we have something that comes up, we're not being able to take advantage of it.
Well, I know I talked to Mike a lot about this. You know, he keeps in touch with DOT and how this goes. And there are a couple projects we'll have matching funds for, whether it be, 218 Business North, and then trying to think, is that First Street? I mean, so we'll have some that are matching funds, but you're not talking millions of dollars of matching funds. It's probably hundreds of thousands of dollars of matching funds, and we address those as we need to going forward also. But those are the only other projects that I've seen come up that may be occurring. I think they're coming in the next year or so, a couple of years. We'll have to have some matching funds for those projects from DOT, but Bremer's got to get done first before any of those occur.
Where does, worst case scenario, and I know there's been no decision made on Champions Ridge,
Right.
but if for some reason that project moves forward, what's our obligations and how soon on that?
We've bought the ground that we've bought. We were already paying the debt on it that we're paying, other than maybe a lift station, which would probably come from sewer fees, something along that line. I don't know if we borrow for that or not. That would be it, and I guess you'd have to negotiate out if you even want to do that, or if you want to do any road improvements. Do you want to do street through there? I mean, that's all I think negotiable in the sense. I don't think we have anything we have to do other than we have acquired the property, and then possibly lift station would be the other issue that may come up.
Are we committed to a driveway intersection interchange on Highway 3 if that would happen?
I don't believe so. Mike, if you want to, you or Bill want to address that as well. I know we've talked about this before. It's.
There was
I don't know, we
council
have-
action at one point committing $500,000 at some point, but that didn't materialize as far as what they were going to do to move forward.
Okay.
I think there was a resolution of that nature, wasn't there? For roadway or for?
I believe there was something with it. I can't recall if it was.
Yeah, I think it was but it didn't materialize in that sense. I think there was a commitment to do that, but there wasn't anything that was actually agreed to, like an agreement that was moving forward on it. They just wanted to know if that was possible, so I think that's all we had so far.
Step into the middle of the conversation we're talking about.
Any possible,
Highway 3 and the turnoff or driveway.
Champions
to the
Ridge.
Champions Ridge.
City.
if we had any further obligations going forward there that we aren't demonstrating in our documents. And then again, with the ground purchase we have, and then you've got lift station potentially, which may not be a bonded item. You've got possibly a road, maybe, which sounds like there was something at one point in time, but
Yeah, I think a gentleman's agreement was if you go forward with the project, we'll commit $500,000 to the interchange, and we'll commit to a lift station if it's necessary.
I believe that's what it was, a general direction, I think. Yeah.
right.
Well, I remember some council discussion on that anyway and things, so.
29th Avenue Southwest, is that 240th Street in the county?
240th.
I think so.
So that's in, is that 2020, the county's looking at reconstructing that roadway going west across the bypass. So we have a little bit between Walmart and the railroad tracks that we'd probably be responsible for and want to partner with at the same time. Look at having them take the lead, take on the design and inspection, but we would have cost sharing in the portion that's in the city. Another one that we need to be mindful of is that we annexed into the city, 20th Street Northwest. This is Country Meadows Drive here, 12th Street Northwest going on out. In order to service the area that was annexed, the sewer would flow east, and there's a lift station on 12th Street here. So that lift station is undersized for the amount of development that would take place, and there would also need to be the trunk sewer to get up to that piece of property. So there's no timetable, but that's something that we need to be, we are aware of.
That wouldn't be on the tax levy, though, that would be on sewer fees, though, wouldn't it?
Or sewer revenue bond
Sewer
of some
revenue,
sort,
yeah.
or something along that line, probably be the way we do it, state revolving fund. I mean, something that is non-capacity driven
Right.
and not necessarily tax-based driven like that, so.
Based on the conversation I had recently, I would say that's 5 years out at least, possibly a little longer. And,
We do have the road projects factored in that are going to go to the west of that, clear up. We have those that are on the list that we had as well. Again, future possibilities of multiple years out, and those are flexible and fluid. And that's the thing about the list we looked at. Really, the first year or two is where we kind of fine tune what it looks like. After that, it's really hard to pinpoint. We just have a what if in there, and it can move, it can jump, it can, the amounts will be different. It's just the best estimates we have at that point in time. But right now, the first handful of projects we've got, that's what we tried to factor in.
And when are we due to do another sort of strategic planning or vision session
This year.
this year?
Yep, we'll do the full 5-year, and we have the 15, 20,000 in there to bring in, like a Richard Fursman type person to bring the community. It'll be the big one with the community involvement all the way through to get another 5-year. We're in the 5th year of our first one from 2013 to 2018, final year of that. And so that'll happen this year, probably towards this summer, we're thinking. Yeah, after July 1st, we have to have money for it, but we would jump in and get that going in summer, fall, we'd wrap that up.
Now, while we're talking about potential plans, potential surprise expenses, is there anything going on with the airport that could contribute to suddenly we get a financial grant to extend this and there's a payment that we're committing to? Is there anything there?
I mean, we have a runway extension. That's probably the biggest thing that we're kind of working through, and that's like 90% federal funded, so it's going to be our matching piece.
One of the things that we do every year in December is we put out the 5-year capital plan for the airport, kind of our ideas. And the reason behind that is to kind of give the FAA a notice of what we're thinking about doing, so that from the federal pipeline, they can start figuring out where the budgets are gonna come. So there aren't a lot of big surprises from the FAA simply
Okay.
because they move at the federal government
move
pace,
slow.
which is
Okay.
a lot slower
Okay.
than necessarily the state popping in and saying, hey, let's get this
Okay,
done.
that makes sense.
And everything going forward that we're kind of looking at is 90% federal funded, so.
Well, it was just in the sense of surprise expenses. I knew the airport has expenses, but they're not surprises, it sounds like.
Not surprising and not huge as far as our contribution.
Okay, thank you.
Would it be prudent just to start in on the project fund section, page by page, project by project? And, because those are funded from various programs, including general fund. And, that would be the blue pages towards the back.
Yeah, I mean, we can walk through these again. These are the capital ones that we did at the end of the last session, correct? Those are the ones you're referring to?
But that would give us a chance to say yes or no
Okay.
on
Yeah, I
what.
think what's helpful to me is to hear, how would you anticipate each project would be financed?
Right.
What fiscal year do you anticipate it would start? And I guess we presume that all financing is 10 years from that
Correct. If we borrow
standpoint.
for it, it's going to be 10 years. That's correct. Yeah, we can walk through these
And
again.
maybe some details, like we
absolutely.
were all a little bit confused about how far down 20th the project went and that sort of thing.
There's no new projects out here.
We'll walk through them again.
Theoretically.
And Capital Improvement Fund, I want to come back to. There are some adjustments in there that may look and hit the levy as well and lower, and that's something that we'll talk about when we get through all this. But that one I want to come back to, because they'll have a little bit of discussion on that. The Public Services Facility was one that we are looking at probably fiscal 2021, somewhere in there, starting that project. That's why you don't see any construction on here now. 2021 is when that'll probably kick in. We're still.
Phase 2.
Yes, the second
two.
phase of the Public Works Building.
And a certain portion of that is paid for by sewer fees.
Water,
or-
sewer,
yeah.
solid waste, because that's all going to be housed out there. It's kind of the discussion we had as far as, do we have a proper allocation? We try to get close, but we're still allowing, funding to go through there to get that done. So that's 2021 would be the estimate roughly. City bridge projects, again, that's
Well, I looked
zeroed out.
at the sidewalk program.
Right,
All seven, quote, 7 areas of the city have been covered.
correct.
So this is basically infill. Is it something that we can delay a year or so?
We can, but it doesn't have any impact on the taxes, because this is a separate fund by itself completely. We don't
okay.
pay for anything with income tax with this portion. And that's something we are going to have to address at some point, though, should we be factoring into the budget, because we're running a deficit pretty much most years now. But you're all right, we are doing infill, would be the next new thing. And we would continue to monitor other sidewalk that maybe 7 years ago wasn't crumbling and bad, but now it is. We just hope it to be significantly less than what would be the case. But yes, most of the projects in here, I will say, we don't have a property tax hit to it unless we're borrowing funding for it. Your big projects, other than the capital improvement fund we'll tackle at the end of this, if you wouldn't mind. But yeah, sidewalk, we have to identify at some point, how are we gonna do that? 'Cause we're running a deficit. Now, I think the number, the 100,000 that's in there, may be a little high. We're hoping that it's a lot less, because we've been through this division, this section once already. We may not need to have as much replaced, but again, we'll have to take a look at it, review it and see. But if you want to delay it a year, we certainly can do that. It's not an issue for us at all. It's just, it does not have the impact for the tax rate by any means. It just is less that we would look at for this year.
It's the general fund expenditures that I think I would be primarily interested in, what we
Okay.
can do.
Then let's jump to, again, seal coating 306 is, we've zeroed that out this year, and that was from a local option. 307 is the Parkway East, which again, we've decided, are we gonna do that or not? That'll be something you'll have to figure out. That's gonna be local option, and TIF. You see, we would propose starting fiscal 19, as it's one of the projects that we're talking about, the one we're entering into, and then finish it in the early part of fiscal 20. We were looking at fall of 2019, we would be done roughly, summer, fall, which is technically start of fiscal 20, so I don't want to confuse anybody with that. And that's kind of what we're showing here.
If I could, real quick, I understand the focus here, but I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't go back to the Third Street Bridge. I get enough feedback from folks that if we don't do anything, we need to do something more substantial to keep people from using it.
I can see
My
that.
understanding is it's still a walking bridge for a lot of people, and
Not supposed to be, but I understand how they go around the barricades, and we could certainly seal that off more permanently if we choose to do that as a council. If you want to do that, we can seal that off more permanently, so there will not be anybody.
first step, and then I think just, my sense is, as a community, we've exhausted the repair feasibility perspective, so that means it's gonna have to come down at some point.
Yes, sir.
I don't think it fits this
Placed or
year.
not, it would have to come down to
I
something.
don't think it fits this year, but I think maybe next year we have to look real seriously at least funding the demolition part of it.
Yeah, absolutely, we can do that. And if you want that more secured, Mike, I assume there's a way we can secure those bridge ends a lot more to keep people from getting on it at all. I mean, lock it down, and nobody's getting on that, without vandalism or some other nature, but we can do that. We can certainly shore that up and make sure it's secure.
Yeah, I think feedback I get, they're using the walkway as well as the roadway part of it, so it's
Yeah, we'll have to,
figure out. Again, that's just my opinion, so that's probably something the rest of the council needs to weigh in on.
absolutely. Look forward
Well, and I
to
don't
council
think it's a
anything
dead issue. I mean, it hasn't been in the news lately, but a lot of people want a bridge there with cars on it.
Even from out of town. It's still, a hot project, or
Yeah.
hot item for discussion just about everywhere you go, so.
Yeah, I agree. I think at some point we need to address it, and sooner rather than later, because people expect it to be addressed.
I feel like we need to do something with the Cedar Parkway Bridge before we make a decision on the Third Street Bridge. I think that's definitely going to change the considerations for that bridge in terms of what the demand there is.
I think that's something that we'll need to measure and see, is it
Right.
two totally different sets of traffic?
Right.
You know, there's a whole set of the population in Northeast Waverly that use that bridge frequently and will not use the Parkway Bridge to go way east of town and then come back.
It's true.
No,
So whether it's, you know, if there's people sneaking across it, that means that there's something apparently is needed there. So, you know, so, but it'll be interesting, see what the traffic pattern is once that, if we do the Parkway.
They definitely are gonna serve two different segments of the
Yeah.
population. There's,
I would note that people sneaking across it right now are pedestrians.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
I have not been made aware of any vehicles.
And that's going to stop. We will get that secured, and that will stop. We need to post an officer, Rich? Can we send somebody?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think not just demolition, but I've had a lot of people express interest in can we do something with one of the green spans? Can it go in a park? Can it be you know, to save that? So I think then that's expense there too,
Fish
so.
habitat.
I've heard zip line too.
Zip line.
I like it. Hook your bike up, sled it first. Get some exercise, but, okay.
Moving on.
Yeah, moving on. Burning daylight. No, very
But it
well taken.
shouldn't go away. I don't
No,
want
no,
that
no, no.
discussion to disappear because it's important to
Well, I don't think it's ever going to go away like that. I think it's
Right.
just, this year we have other things to tackle,
Yeah.
but we will definitely engage in that again.
And I guess a question I have about that, and this is for Mike, is there was a lot of engineering done, which would be useful perhaps going forward, and how many years can you let it go by until you have to pay for all that again? It's my
Well, the
question.
engineering for a two-lane vehicle bridge was the option that was not engineered. That would still have to be done from
Okay,
scratch.
from scratch.
Extent, although some of the underside, the borings, et cetera, some of that would be, maintained. But that
A lot of
option
it's
was
new.
not engineered.
Okay.
So that would still be a one to have to go forward. Okay, so if we jump back to 307 Parkway, we've kind of hashed on what that would look like. We finally factored in the 20th Street rail crossing and the 5th Street or 5th Avenue. I get my streets and avenues mixed up. Both of them would look like that. Again, we would start in this year, finish up the residual the next year, and then possibly we'd have the roadway working into the 2020 for the other phase, the Phase 1B, I guess you would want to call it. We have to start titling these different. So that part would then kick in. And that could be accelerated to 1920 as well if the funding was there. That's why it's a little fluid. But 1819 is when we would do that project if you go forward with it. Otherwise, we push it off in the 1920 or so on, as long as you wanted to wait on that. Alley reconstruction is another one we've kind of talked about. Do we continue to do that or not? It's paid for from local option sales tax, so I know it's not really the general fund, but I think it's one we kind of have to have some kind of decision on. Do we continue to do alley reconstruction or not? I know there's others that are probably needing repair. We still have the one to do in the spring. But is that something council wants to continue with, to keep renovating and improving those alleys behind the businesses downtown and along the corridor?
So this extends, is this mainly east of the river, or both sides of the
Both,
river?
it can be
both
both,
sides, yeah.
depending on what's there. When you get west, there's not as many alleys in general. There's only so many left, otherwise it's streets, et cetera. So the downtown area east has most of them, obviously, but as we cross over, there are some still, as you get towards Fourth, that have it as well, that we would also entertain, reconstructing or improving.
To me, it's a reasonable investment to make to support our businesses in town, especially with reconstruction. I mean, their back door becomes their front door.
That was very evident this year, yes.
I know snow removal, solid waste removal is much easier where we have done that, so. I would fully support continuing to look at it.
How much alleyway do you get for 75,000?
We get a couple of them done.
Behind a couple of businesses?
Couple
or-
blocks.
Oh, a couple blocks?
We do a full block behind each, like the one we did this last fall was behind Bremer Avenue,
Yeah.
Bremer Diner, that whole block stretch there, which we were happy to see is now tore up, thanks to CenturyLink putting a vault in, so that brand new concrete was cut open months later. But it will be put back perfectly, if need be, because I was not real happy to see that, dropping this massive vault in the middle of that. We just finished that months prior. So,
And that will happen.
yes, that's what
We
causes
have-
some of these.
Yeah.
All the utilities are back behind, so.
It's unfortunate, but it looked really nice before it happened, though. It was really nice. So, yeah, and we have one more to do as well. Mayor's aware of where that goes, bring it up too much. That was pre-mayor, that was pre-mayor.
That was pre-mayor. No, there was no influence from this position over that.
That's a
Me too.
pretty tough one that we need to do exactly. I don't want anybody
The
thinking,
podium when you came up and requested it.
that's right. But that's the other one to do this spring yet, would be that section. So we're kind of trying to branch them off. Do we alternate? Do we? But, I know the one behind the chamber was busted up a lot with utility work, and all of them have some issues in a sense. We'll try to hit the more severe ones as we do. We get about 2 full blocks of alley done for this, maybe even a little more depending on the nature of it. But yeah, that's kind of what we're aiming to do, is continue to, because I agree myself, it is a secondary entrance for a lot of businesses that, it's improved, or snow removal, or just in general, it's easier for walkability. It has definitely helped.
One of those areas where it's an expense, but I think
Pays
to
off.
get it repaired and then keep a maintenance of it is better. Kind of like the sidewalks, it was an expense initially going through the first 7 years to do it, but now we're into more of a maintenance to try to, go through and note where there is deterioration so that property owners get them taken care of, and if it's on city land, we can get it taken care of.
Absolutely.
But it looks like you don't have that going forward. So are you coming with the next fiscal year then? Are you coming to a
Each
stop
year,
for
we'd
a
want
while?
to
or-
have you determine, do we move forward again? And a lot of it's going to be reviewing the alleys, see what does need it, does it not need, just where are we really looking at? We probably need to do that this spring, is take a good look, take a hard walk to see where are we, and get some photos of what are we truly seeing. But for now, we're looking at probably, finishing last year's block, and then probably another couple blocks of them. And again, funding is still there. We do patches or repairs of ones that aren't that bad, but that's kind of what we're looking at.
And we're having fewer and fewer alleys that are left too. A lot of them are being purchased and are being eliminated. But, I will say that the alleys that have not been redone, they do deteriorate quickly. Even when they've been patched, they're basically gravel. And once you start a pothole in there, it gets large very quickly. And there are a lot of service vehicles and delivery vehicles, not to mention just general traffic, that uses those alleys. Particularly, it's easier to do that than using Bremer Avenue to unload a service vehicle or to unload a delivery vehicle. We don't want Bremer Avenue being blocked off by a semi delivering goods. So I think keeping them, in the long term, certainly it could be put off for a number of years. It's not really bothering anybody that much, but I think in the long term, having those fixed makes a lot of sense. So, it's not a particularly expensive project, and doing it over a number of years, I think, makes some sense. So.
Okay. Brian, you okay with that?
I'm okay, that makes sense to me, yep.
All right, we'll continue with that then. So, Cedar Lane, well, that's one we didn't get in there, did we? We have it shown out for 2021, and, but it would be in 1920, about the same figures, about 900,000 to $1 million. We would get it done in a single season. It would be in the spring of 19, when it would occur most likely, again, because of the construction of Bremer Avenue, but it'd be about 900,000. It would come from debt, geo bond, so it's going to be taxable. What's that, Tim?
Have to be spring of 20 right now, because if it's
Spring of 19.
would have to be in this budget.
Oh, we're talking about.
That's what we're
that.
saying, if you want to add it in. We wanted to show it, and we missed that one. So if you look at the 2020 numbers, you slide them over, it'd be 18, 19 would be that first phase of that. That's where that would occur. It would be taxable. We've got the engineering already done.
Again,
That's what it
Oh,
looks
so
Not
we
to
don't
jump.
need that 100,000 other engineering that's in there?
No, this is probably phase two is what we're seeing here, but phase one's about equivalent, just a little less because the engineering's already done and paid for. So it'd be about 900,000 is the estimate I would use for that total project. Is that fair, Mike? About 900? It was a little less than that when we first had it a year or so ago. Just in cost increase, I'd say close to 900,000. That's what we factored in and budgeted the 22-cent increase on, was 900,000.
And how far north does phase one go?
Up to Brown Lane.
Oh, up to Brown, okay.
So just to be clear, we're talking about the Adams Parkway Bridge in next year's, in this coming budget?
Yep.
And that would be completed in fall of this year?
Probably early spring of the
In
next
spring
year.
of next year?
Both would be done in 19, but they cannot be done at the same time.
Correct,
One's going to be
correct.
spring, one's going to be fall.
Okay.
But there may be time that we would be done both in the spring
But
of
if
19.
the Cedar Lane was in the fall, wouldn't it be in the following budget?
Yes.
If it was fall of 19, yes.
Correct, okay.
Yes.
But
It
you're-
could be
you're
done in
wanting to-
spring of
You're
19.
wanting to possibly show it in the budget for next year, and if it does not have the timing wise, it has to be pushed back, it just shifts with
Or
that.
do you need
Well, I
it
wouldn't
to
want to do
start the
that, because if we
project?
go out to the debt market, we have to spend that money in so many increments
Right.
every 6 months as well to be compliant with that. So if we're going to do it, we'd have to have it done in the spring of 19. So I guess, Mike, when you look at that, not to put you on the spot, but if we, wanted to do the Adams Parkway deck and Cedar Lane back to back, not at the same time, obviously, could that be accomplished in the spring construction season 2019?
Both of them back to back?
Both of them.
No.
Okay. So then you have to delay Cedar Lane then till fall of 20, or fall of 19, which is fiscal 20,
Okay.
if that's one that you're wanting to have
I think that's what we're thinking.
Or do it fall of 18.
after Bremer would be done. It'd be pretty tight. That could be a tough one. We'd have to be sure that Bremer was completed, because that end of town's the one they're going to be probably finishing through, you're trying to even be done before the fire convention.
And I say it a little bit
That'd be a tough one.
because of
Try
what
it.
we saw Cedar Lane being used for when, if it was under construction, it would not be the shortcut around town, which may not be bad.
Yeah. That'd be a tough one.
I-
It's possible, but it's not.
So in April, they're going to start on East Bremer. We hope it's going to be done by Labor Day, but it is the most difficult, most challenging 7 blocks of the entire project, so.
Based on the first few blocks we saw down that area and the things we found in the ground, the vaults and I don't even want to imagine what it's going to be like for that part out. Just because there's so much in there, it's one of the oldest parts of town right down there, and stuff's been in there 100 and some years. You don't know what you're going to dig up. It's a challenge. It certainly is. And then the length of it, you're talking, what, 8 blocks? Is it 8?
A little over 7, about 7.
At one time that's a big one. So that might be a little tough to factor in both. We may be looking at
You just
19,
can't-
but just fall of 19 instead of spring of 19.
To try to, plan that, and you'd be so dependent upon one being done, and then if Bremer Avenue is, for some reason gets slowed down or gets delayed, I just hate to be in
Again,
that position.
I'm not looking for them to not be going on at the same time. My thought was they could go on at the same time just to alleviate that as a way to get around town. But again, that probably has more downsides than upsides for the community versus the neighborhood, that type of thing.
So should we even be thinking about Cedar Lane for this budget?
It's just a choice or an option, 20
But I mean,
Cedar
will it
Lane.
fit? I mean, if we budget it this year, is the money still there if it gets a late start and can't do it till?
If we borrow the money, we could still do it in the spring of 19. I'd have to check and see if we borrowed it this year, if it would be acceptable to delay it until fall of 19. It probably is. I think construction is a 18-month to 2-year window to spend it. It's just about how much. I think the good thing is if the Parkway goes through and you borrow that as well, we'll be burning through plenty of money in that time frame to accomplish what's required through your bond attorneys and the increments you have to spend. So it is possible we could still borrow it and do it in the fall of 19 versus having to do another bond issue right away in July to get the money to do it at the same time period. I can check with Mark Corey Monday bright and early and have that for you by the evening as to what the requirements are to allow that to occur.
So Mike, the Adams, the resurfacing takes how long? And you'd anticipate doing that early summer of 19, year 19,
well,
not
they-
fiscal.
Spring of 19.
Spring of 19.
Again, if it works better to reverse them and do the bridge deck after Cedar Lane, that's fine, too.
It's funded regardless. It's sitting in local option, just
So
sitting.
you need a 4 to 6 week construction window, but then the contractor needs a larger window to work it in with the various projects they have going on. So, and what we're talking about is, before July 1 or after July 1, as opposed to spring. When we're saying spring, fall, we're really talking before the 4th or after the 4th of July.
You just got to cut that date to get a different fiscal year.
And from a safety standpoint, as far as how the bridge is there any preference you have for which goes first?
Again, whether it's early or late, before July 1 or after July 1, a couple months probably isn't going to matter.
And how long do we expect the Cedar Lane reconstruction would take?
From beginning to end, it would probably be looking at a 6 to 8 week window.
Okay, so the Adams Parkway was 4 to 6 weeks, and the Cedar Lane would be 6 to 8 weeks.
Right.
So you can do them in the same summer, but
Oh,
2
oh,
fiscal years.
absolutely, right.
Easily. Just splitting that June 30 fiscal is the weird
right,
thing.
right.
Why they ever did that, I don't know. Because construction doesn't stop June 30th and we start over again. You have to stop it, you have to tally, you have to bill it, you have to count for it. But absolutely it can be done in a construction season, easy. It's just June 30 makes it, yeah. And it can carry over from one to the other. It's not a huge deal. Again, we can do that. It's just cleaner if we don't. But certainly possible. So if you decide at the point that you want to reverse them, and we can certainly hammer that out at the end as well as we continue to move through. And I think that's going to be a good summary of what do we think we have, and we'll try and get things prepped and have a little better idea Monday night as to what it all looks like, and then you can readjust as well from there.
But the bridge deck is funded with lost,
Yep.
and Cedar Lane is funded,
Be property tax through a debt, through a bond.
oh,
That's that 22-cent.
so trying to do what we'd like to accomplish doesn't lend itself well to that end result.
Well, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
Well-
Whatever council would like to do is
I mean-
what council would like to do, I guess. That's where I take the direction. Right.
Well, it seems like splitting the Adams Parkway and the Cedar Lane, one of them before July 1st and one of them after makes sense.
Absolutely.
I mean, which one comes first is subject to negotiation. I mean, you could flip-flop them, whatever makes the budget work out better. I mean, we're talking about getting them both done in the same summer, just one before.
Right. You just have to, you'd then be locking yourself into fiscal 20, not knowing what that's going to look like, that we're doing this. And that's the only downside is you know what you have now. Do you know what you're going to have next year? We'll know in a year where we sit, and you would have that decision then. Do you do it then or not based on that information? So yeah, you have time to determine that. It's just which one you want to do.
I guess when I looked at it, my goal was to have Cedar Lane's Phase 1 project done in calendar year 2018. But because of Bremer Avenue reconstruction, that's probably not feasible.
It complicates it a lot to do that. I don't know that it's feasible. And if it is, it would be a push, and you're talking late season, not knowing how it's going to be finishing and weather, and it just could get kind of tough.
Which then almost automatically makes it a 2018-19 or 2019-20 budgeted item.
Unless you do it in the spring of 19.
Do it the first. You do it first.
If it's
then you do the
first, it
bridge.
could still happen in the spring of 19. If it's second, it would be, you're right, fiscal 20, summer 19. That's what makes it, yeah, fiscal years.
And the bridge resurfacing is already in the,
It's funded
Budget.
currently, could be shifted forward, back. It's just, it's sitting there taking funds as it sits. It's been planned for a number of years, so.
But that's funded with lost and would not affect, even if we shifted it, it's not going to change the.
No, it does
the
not at
funding,
all.
so.
does it free up that amount of lost money?
At that moment, until you decide to do it, because it would
Or else
just
it just sits?
pocket it, yeah, it just sits.
Okay.
It would just be
And
moved to the
waits.
next year, and
Okay.
you would generate a fund balance, and it would reduce that fund balance the year after.
Okay.
And that's,
You don't have to spend it on something else if you don't have a worthy project.
we do not at all. You're absolutely correct.
Okay, I think if we've gone through that one, let's continue
Beat that one
on.
Pretty solid. We'll move on to the next.
Everybody understands it now.
Bremer Avenue, of course, we have the first payment, second, third, we kind of talked about that, that's kind of what we're looking at already. First one is gonna be a water bond, so it would not hit capacity, and that one's already factored into the budget. So then you jump to 315, which is the 4th Street project, and again, we saw that in the sheets we're looking at. We've got that slated for fiscal '20. We'll see what happens DOT. It could be '21. It's going to be right in there, but it's not going to be sooner. Obviously, Bremer Avenue has to get done, so that would be property tax as well, most likely at this point in time. Adams Parkway Bridge, again, we've talked about that. Local option funding, whether it's fiscal '19 or fiscal '20, you'll have to decide that, but it's funded. And then that would jump us to Fund 330, the airport extension. And we've kind of talked briefly about that. That's kind of ongoing, engineering and the reimbursement from the feds at 90%. Over the next few years, we'll see that mature, and then that will hopefully be done. Is it 2021 that's to be finished, Mike, when you're done? Runway extensions, 2021, we hope to be finished with that, or is it later yet?
I think the construction's slated for the summer of 2020.
Okay.
So whether it's before July 1 or after July 1.
Fair enough. Calendar 2020 is what we hope to have that.
Who came up? Why can't we just go with calendar year? Because it works so much better for construction.
It'd be so much easier that way.
Match up with the federal and go in October.
I don't want to do anything the federal does. That just makes it worse. October. Who picks October? Really?
So the only thing that's funded, or proposed to be funded for the runway extension this year, this fiscal, or coming fiscal, is the engineering?
Yes. I believe that's correct, as we get that started.
And
Okay.
is this so would you clarify just for me, is this the turnaround area that you showed on the map that we're talking about?
It's a 400-foot extension to the east and the
And the-
turner. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And then we'll jump to
Champions Ridge, that's just,
yeah, it's probably about the next.
That's just
Which
money
one?
coming in.
Yeah, I mean, Champions Ridge it's just the funding that's sitting there, the payments, the money coming in. There's nothing expended necessarily that year. It's just another fund that we've shown.
So that's really the end of the capital projects being
It
proposed.
really is. It really is.
And the fund balance in the Fair Ball Diamond account, we're allowing that to accumulate with the assumption that, again, we were going to partner on a couple of other, the entrance and the lift station, those type of things.
I believe so. It's my understanding as well.
So if in the near future, there's a decision made on viability there, that funds would be available to reallocate towards other rec program,
You're looking
pool,
at Fund
memorial
341.
fund.
Right.
Yeah, if something were to occur that we had to reimburse back the fair for the money they've paid us, whatever balance would be there could be utilized for that. That's what I would use it for, is maintenance or improvements or whatever decides to happen. I don't know how much of that would be left, but yeah, the remaining balance could be certainly used for that.
How long do you think it'll take to get some ideas about other places for the fair, which I guess isn't really our problem, so to speak, but other places for ball diamonds and other uses for that land?
We've been working through that. We could have it done another week. So we could have it to you for the 19th meeting easily. We can have a discussion then if you choose, or the study session after, whichever council would like to do. We can easily have it done another week. We've already got some ideas. We're just kind of fine tuning the what if, the possibilities. And again, it's kind of going to go to your directions of what do you want to do. But we can certainly have a discussion. I'd say the 19th would be easy to have that. What's that? For study session, yeah, either one.
That might be a
That
better.
might be good.
Well, we can shoot for the study session then, the 26th.
26th, yes.
Okay, we'll do that then.
I know that the fair, brief discussion with at least one member, they're doing that what if too, because again, the lease is up. They know 2019, they have to be somewhere else, I guess, to put their fair on. And
I know they're looking at what if, in that exact occasion, if you hold them to that lease, then this is the final fair in 2018 in that location, then what would they do next? Would they come back for a one-year extension because they have a plan of exit, or all that's kind of getting, I think, discussed and thrown around as well. So I agree. I think everybody's kind of prepping for what might be, what might not, and study session would probably be a good one to have that, and maybe let them know as well to come and just maybe they have their ideas, and maybe it's maybe a big encompassing what if. That may not be a bad thing at all, actually.
again, I think there's been commitment not to necessarily say it's a dead horse per se, but I think we all need to look at what's next.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
Who owns the buildings at the fairgrounds?
I think we own the buildings, some of them. or do
'Cause they
own
rent them.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
So
That was the
they
answer.
get the revenue for renting them?
We own the shelters, we own the horse barn, we own the pool and the Kids Kingdom area, obviously. It's our property. They own the ag buildings, the pork building, the beef building, the poultry building, the office, 4-H building, and Drosy building.
They own those. Okay. So when their lease runs out and we take over that property, do we have to buy those buildings from them, or?
Or tear them down. They can move them if they want. I don't know if we need to buy them or not. That's down the road.
What if?
Part of the big what if?
and again, just for historical perspectives, I think that question helped drive the city's contribution towards paying down their mortgage.
Okay.
Again, I don't know that it's ever been stated in any document, but I know based on the discussions was, again, we want to be good landlords, we want to be good partners with them, we weren't going to kick them off and then take their buildings. Here's one way that we can help lessen the burden of losing those buildings, is by helping pay down basically the mortgage on their property. Again, that was the intent of some, behind that decision.
Good to know, actually. So it's gonna
Contributed in that way too?
Factor in. What's that?
Did the county help them too, or?
The county is supporting the fair's desire to move, yes,
Financially?
yes. And we match the county's contribution to help pay down the mortgage, so. County was helping pay down the mortgage, the fair was paying down the mortgage, we help by discounting the mortgage.
Okay.
One thing that just came out of the blue, is there anything in the budget to do, if the hospital goes through with their plan to wanting to acquire the present golf maintenance building, is there anything in the budget to replace that?
No, not at this point in time. They've not made an indication that is going to happen the next year. There's question, do they really need it or not to start with?
Okay.
There's a whole lot of things evolving with that as well, but right now, we didn't have anything focused in for
All
anything
right.
like that.
Very good.
TAB has brought forward a project to at least have somebody look at the
Yep.
possibility of using buildings at the fairground.
Yeah,
Placement buildings.
yeah.
Yeah, we have that going on in this current budget right now, actually, so we'll know shortly what that looks like, which will be helpful. So, okay, I guess with council would allow me, let's go to the capital improvement fund, 301. We'll have a little discussion about that. The revenue that comes in from here is, a transfer from general fund, about 50,000, and revenue from electric utility contributions through Waverly Utilities. And then we've generally used that for studies or small projects, things like that. At times, we've done capital equipment, smaller pieces, et cetera. This is where we transfer out for the bridge maintenance, a lot of those things. So it's a good use of a lot of funding. We're starting to build a balance. and we've been anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 in that balance. Part of what I would want to consider, and again, council can look at this, is would we take the final payment for the fire truck and ambulance from here, which would be $139,000. When I look at that, it takes it down to about just over $200,000, which is still more than where we've had a balance in the last 4 years, or 3 years, I guess, shown, and even past going forward. That is an additional $139,000 off of the tax roll, off of the property tax that would come from this fund. And again, we build this for projects like this. Each year we refresh a certain amount. We're a little light this year compared to where we've been, and in the coming years, we don't have anything necessarily listed out. And since those are only a piece of equipment we replace every 4 or 5 or more years, actually, when you look at the pumper truck, it's 30 years old, I believe, so we're good for 30 years on that one. The ambulance, so many years, they'll be looking at another, but again, we're setting money aside. And I don't normally like to do a lot of that, but in view of where we are, is that a possibility? Does council want to consider something like that? I mean, I think it's maintainable, this fund, even if that occurs, I think it's feasible. Again, we still have things allocated in years to come, and you can see the balances, they continue to grow.
Your
Just a thought to throw out there.
suggestion for doing that is to allow the lost fund to stay larger?
It's to reduce the amount of property tax hitting us, because those two amounts would come out of the fire and ambulance budgets currently.
But aren't those purchases being funded through lost?
Part of it is. The money that's been set aside already is, and that would continue. The final purchase is actually being, whereas police has the purchase completely transferred in out 100%. When you look at, and Jennifer, you may have to help me with the ins and outs of this. So I was looking through fire, you've got the $225,000 purchase for the pumper truck. 152 of that is actually funded already, 72,000 is not. We do not have money set aside for that. That is a taxable piece. And that's what would reduce what we're looking at. We did not have 100% of the funding set aside, and at 25,000 a year, which is what we put away for fire, is that correct, 25,000? We have another 3 years before we could fully fund that vehicle by putting another 25 a year away. So if they wanted to purchase it this year, that 72,000 would be taxed to do that,
And
unless we
then,
pull it from this fund.
and then 66,000 from the general fund is for the ambulance.
Correct.
And basically, you're suggesting that instead of pulling that money from the general fund to supplement the lost, we can pull that money from the capital improvement fund.
Right, which takes it off the taxes. Again, I think ambulance is the same way, unless I'm misreading this. If I am, I'm certainly
Again, I-
willing to admit it.
I thought the money we've transferred to reserves came out of lost, not property tax. And the balance that would be needed to purchase the truck would come out of lost instead of this year's allocation to the reserve.
I think the reserve has come out of loss.
Correct.
But I think that the extra is coming out of the general. So I'm looking at this sheet that was in the inside front cover that has the listing of all the capital items by department.
Right.
And in here on the second and third line for fire and ambulance, it describes how much comes out of reserve and how much is coming out of the general fund.
The fire
Whole
truck
thing.
does not come out of lost. That piece does not. That comes out of which fund, Jennifer, please?
301.
Fund 301, the capital improvement fund itself. So we have taken 25,000 from the fund we're talking about every year, setting it aside for that truck. This would be basically making the full final payment out of that fund instead of out of the general fund. We just kind of pulled back from putting a lot into this fund initially till we knew what we had for requests, knowing that some allocation could occur. That happens every year. I think years prior, we'd moved, I can't remember what project it was, into it. Like I said, it's escaping me,
So
concrete
the-
projects.
The transfer into the 301 is coming from property tax?
From the general fund, yes.
So we've never paid for fire
Fire
apparatus?
equipment that big from lost. Right. The aerial. I think that, yeah, was that part of the, yeah, it was the fire station / truck bond. I think the aerial was part of the station. So the bonds we're doing were partly for the aerial, is that correct? So that's the one piece we have taken out of loss. Otherwise, loss, if you look at it, has captured ambulance and fire.
I guess I thought that we were treating this similar to the police vehicle. Because the fire department supports non-tax paying entities, people coming through town. One way to share that cost was to fund their vehicle replacement through lost.
And maybe that was the intent. I just know that that has not been the case, other than the aerial was funded through Lost. But this truck has not been. It's been through the Fund 301.
Yeah, I just assumed the transfers we were doing in were lost dollars, not general fund dollars.
We've always fund.
That wasn't the way it was happened when I started here, so I just continued the way it was being done. The only things that came out of the lost were the bonds.
So just if I can summarize, you're saying instead of taking from the general fund, the last 66,000 for the ambulance and 70,
Well, the fire truck for sure. The 66, I'm
Okay.
still fuzzy on, because I do think we transfer it from local option. I do think that comes from there.
on the white sheet it says general fund, but.
Well, that's where we're paying it from initially, but I think the reserves are coming in. Well, let me think, Jennifer, can we,
It's listed on.
this is what happens when you do this 7, 8 o'clock at night, and this is what starts to sink in. I know we show it in the ambulances coming out of their budget, which would be taxable, but I know we have reserves built up of 134,000. Now, does that include this year's $66,000 transfer or not?
No.
Does not. So then, yeah, ambulance would be one that we would not have to do that or not be able to do that. We do have the funding from local option coming for the ambulance.
Okay,
Now to look at that again,
so instead of 139, it would be
the
73.
73 roughly.
I guess I would,
I think if you look at the ballot from 2002, it reads 100% for law enforcement and public safety projects. Therefore, it'd be the fire station, including acquisition of equipment. So therefore, then it would have been the aerial. Why it has not been added into reserve for following trucks, I'm not sure about that either.
The second page of the lost funding shows fire capital equipment over a couple of years, but not.
I think it's smaller equipment, but not like the truck allocations that have been transferred through. So we did bought equipment out of there, just not the vehicle, other than the aerial.
new language for lost would allow us to do that if we so desired.
I think so, because I think it does say emergency equipment, the new language would.
Okay, I would,
That starts when? Did we figure that out?
20. We actually figured that out. We will run through fiscal 19 on the old local option, and fiscal 20, it will start new,
So when you say fiscal 20, do you mean 19 to 20?
1920. I'll start to say that more, fiscal 1920.
To 20, okay.
Not the budget we're building, the next one,
Okay.
the next one.
I guess for my simpler brain, once things get in there, it doesn't come out. I would encourage us to look at funding future fire truck transfers, setting up the reserve through lost, and I would support taking the final payment to balance out this purchase through the capital improvement.
I would agree.
Give it to council, we can move that 73,000 over.
Yep.
So that being the case then, we do have another 25 going in this year, which is partly funding this, so we wouldn't do it, but next year we would start moving that to lost. Okay.
Again, the reason that seems reasonable in my mind is just because of the amount of service we provide to non-tax-paying individuals in the community through both the fire and the police and the ambulance. I think when you look at our total call volume, 40% or more of it is non-tax-paying entities, those type of things.
Is there anything else you think could come out of that fund?
Well, that's what I'm kind of debating on. Initially, those are just the two, because I didn't want to tax it too far, but if we look at some of the other items, pull this, again, it would be equipment, projects, things like that, that we're currently paying for out of general fund. Find my own sheets here. 'Cause that's kind of what we try to use that for, is to do these kind of projects and some equipment usage, just not to overutilize it. again, it's just as we're looking to try and make projects fit.
So
Like the audio upgrades for the Civic Center, you know, that's been one we've looked at as well. That's currently taxable, that 20,000 could come from there. You know, that's one that could, a capital improvement fund from there.
can you use it for like parks, what parks needs, like mowers, that sort of thing, or not?
I believe we can use it, Jennifer, for whatever capital projects we'd want to use it for.
So do you have a limit? So do you have sort of a dollar amount that you would not want to spend over?
I don't
out
want
of
to
there?
take a fund balance below at least a couple 100,000, which is about what the 139 was going to do. So yeah, if there was another 60, roughly 66 was what we were predicting, before I kind of got that corrected, because in my head it wasn't clicking yet. Got to quit kicking that caffeine and staying off that. I needed that last night. If we were to locate $66,000 worth of funding, that would be about what I was hoping to do in the first place.
And do you anticipate any change in the amount of money that's going to go into that fund?
I don't. We had looked at also maybe not doing the transfer of 50,000 in from the general fund this year to additionally try to, again, keep this levy a little lower than it is to try and focus and bring in the projects that we want so we're not having such a substantial increase. While I know it's cost what it costs, we still want to be kind of responsible to get that lower if we can. If we couldn't, why would we not do that? If we could possibly do it and just leave it elevated, we would not want to do that. So yeah, if you looked at the Civic Center and you looked at the mower, there'd be 47.
But this would also be maybe a place to look if we needed to do something relatively quick to transfer
Right.
the golf course. We need to do that, renovate some buildings.
It's possible, depending on the fund balance, we sure could.
So again, I fully support not drawing it down too far.
Well, I think just as a matter of policy, the capital improvement fund, I mean, that should be used for exceptional things that come up on an occasional basis. When we're looking at funding things like mowers, yeah, that's an ongoing expense. I'm not sure that that really should be things, except in an emergency situation, that we would take the money from here. I don't have a problem with doing a final payment on the fire truck from here. I think that's okay, since we have a fairly large balance, but I agree in the future, I think that that needs to be funded each year. The local option sales tax makes sense on that, but, you know, I guess I would be a little bit hesitant about getting too creative in how we funded routine kinds of things out of the capital improvement fund. I mean, the sound system here in the building, I think that would be appropriate, and it's probably just a case-by-case basis, but.
Well, that's what we try to do is to not just automatically shove stuff over there. And even the mowers, how often we replace our mowers, the big ones like this, the $27,000 mower. 5 years. So it's not every single year, it's a one time, we replace it, 5 years later, we'd have another one. And that's where you try to focus when I started looking at this, is I don't want to do something every single year we're replacing this. The audio system is probably 20 years old, probably original.
Life of the building, 26.
So I would agree that's one, you're not going to do that for another 20 years. The mowers are getting close limit-wise for me. It was just, you know, once I thought the ambulance was coming out of there, it was like, well, shoot, that's not going to happen. So if there were other things that made sense, you know, we could certainly look at that. I do know the curb replacement has already been reduced, and that was out of the budget, the $8,000. That was part of the 22 we'd already removed.
So
We're
that's
looking to
gone?
delay that. That's correct.
Okay.
So even if just those two, if you wanted to just do that for now, I think that's fine. It does not tax that fund by any means close to what, you know, the balance has been in the past. It'd be $47,000. And then the rest of it, again, is small enough for items that we are replacing, it seems like every year of some sort, that I would not want to necessarily move that. So if that's acceptable to council, we can do those two items from there with the final payment of the fire truck.
You mentioned the audio system in here, what about the computers? Could those go?
They could.
I mean,
We're
it's
just,
not a huge, again, it's not a huge number, but it would be something that would be just, it's there.
for the, like the ones in here,
Council.
Yeah.
we certainly could, because these are.
Yeah.
That one, yeah, and actually, the computers are one that I was gonna offer up to you to remove completely if you chose to, because while we can get by with another year, you know, we've looked at these are older. They've been here So
Or at
talking
least
13
or
years.
At least plan a study for if we want to do
Lower.
lower monitors or
Desk.
in-desk monitors or I was going to say in-dash, but was it
Dashboard. No.
Yeah, have them lower
Lower.
here with a single keyboard or whatever and
And we can do that for no
Single
cost. They can
cloud
spec out what that's gonna look like in a
CD or
sense.
whatever.
We did look at some of the virtual desktops in that number was big. And I just pushed that aside. I didn't wanna look at, that was, well, some other day, we'll take a look at that. That was a lot. Because
Big
of overhauling
ones.
everything to get to that point of.
Front-end costs are pretty high.
It is. I like it going forward, but the initial was a lot.
If I can make a comment about the system here, my recommendation, particularly after attending the planning and zoning meeting last Thursday night, is that all the mics be lavalier mics, and there needs to be a great improvement with the one for that. And because to stand there and hold that mic for, and even today, Mike was holding it for 30 minutes or longer. There's some definite alternatives to that, but I just don't feel comfortable with all this equipment in front of me. And the fact that using the mics that are here, you've got to lean in and
Pull them close and.
look pretty uncomfortable, so.
And we can certainly look at that as well, but I don't disagree for as rare as these are replaced. Like he's 13 years old. Again, it's one of those one-time, very frequent, you could move to there if you chose to. We could move that upgrade here, which is 15. Is that what we have in for that, I think?
15 or 20, something like that.
And that
Yeah,
would
I
almost
believe
put you
the
right to
audio
68.
upgrades for these two rooms were not the microphones, they were mostly the amps and those, and the mixers and that sort of thing.
we could look at how much it would cost to go the other route with the lavaliers or.
I think you
We can certainly look at that. and see what
need
the
to look
cost would be.
at a complete system, would be my suggestion, but
Base bid and alternatives.
Costs money, but. Yeah, but there is some fund there to look at it and see what's there.
There is,
You know,
certainly. Because if
I'd
we're looking
suggest-
at the computers getting done, then you really, all you have left is the mic system, the mics themselves. I mean, we're upgrading this as we can, the system, that's where a lot of this is coming from, really, then this is what's left, is the mics to be looked at.
Well, and the Mike's technology is so vastly improved with cell phones and everything else. I would even mention to the mayor the little mounted ones that could be mounted on the monitors themselves that would pick up at a fair, it would be very inconspicuous in terms of size, but.
Definitely take a study of
People are doing
that.
laptops and having conversations on their laptops without having to have a lavalier mic, and it picks up great. Now the technology is there, so.
The only thing about that is you're going to get all of your shuffling papers.
Uh-huh.
You're going to get a lot of that other noise with your vocal.
And if you have the lavalier, you get, if you're shifting, if you've got a coat on or anything else, you get that as well. So I just,
You would.
there's pluses and negatives of all the systems. So.
Well,
So far,
if
Dean's been
council's
good.
okay with it, then I will move
You get
the
lavaliers and then tab.
computer here to there.
Rich could all have to wear them during the meetings too, so. that-
And we will study and try to find a cost amount of what would be to overhaul that into here. And that's probably about as far as I'd want to tap into that fund, and that's about where we were going to be, 60 roughly, so I think that's a good compromise on that. Okay.
we have some other items that we need to cover at this point.
Yes, sir, I got a few more that I would have you
Okay.
to take a look at. I mean, we're getting in cutting mode, we're going to cut mode. Let me cross out here. I know the library, Sarah just I think, left, but she had offered up, as Tab had went back through and kind of found some areas that maybe they could push, again, try to assist with where we were. The $4,000 for finishing the tables, she thought they could delay that. Well, it's not a tremendous amount of money, I do appreciate the effort. I mean, they could delay that out to do that in another year instead of doing it right now. Again, just want to introduce that to council as a possibility of not doing that piece. If you look into the capital piece of the library, that's part of the $8,000 total, was $4,000 of it was redoing some tables and chairs they had there. So again, if need be, they were fine with not refinishing those. That was one of the smaller ones I had. There's others that we'll take a quick look at here. And then one of the other ones, I know, and chance to talk to Bill about this either, but legal expense, we budgeted quite a bit, because we had a chunk of this in the past year or so. I wonder if we could cut that down, maybe 10 grand, based on our history. We did have a spike. We don't want to necessarily react to a spike each year, but we've not really seen as much. So when you look at the, it's under legal services, attorney, we had a. Right, and they would actually be part of the bond itself, so that could come out of there. So is there a number you're comfortable with? I mean, that's quite a bit. Leaving it at 10? Or taking out 10 or putting it at 10? Taking out 10? Okay. So we could take 10,000 out of there to kind of, again, the bond fees. When we were looking at the summary reports of what was in there, that was part that was in there that actually would become part of the project itself. It is funded separately. So I would look to reduce another 10 out of that.
I mean, we're still anticipate land acquisition between the airport and the parkway. I just want to make sure we don't want to react to a spike, but there's still some
That'd be
fairly
funded through-
active
Land
projects.
acquisition is, I'm doing it as part of I'm just doing it. So I'm not really spending money extra on top for legal expenses.
These would be more of the hired out, outside legal
Right.
Okay.
attorneys that would do, and some of that would be project
Yeah.
reimbursed through the FAA for 90% if we needed.
And actually, some of that budget, and maybe overstated, because some of that's going to come through the project budgets, especially the Parkway.
Right.
A lot of my time is going to get put in through there because of all the time I'm putting into acquisitions.
Even if we end up in the court system with some of these that,
Sure, because it's,
Project.
those things are really one day, pretty much a one-day thing. So they're not really difficult. It's the prep time that takes all the time. And so all those hours aren't being billed out to an outside attorney right now. It's being done by us. So.
That's, like I said, the other one that I had. And then the only other one we had briefly mentioned again was, do we transfer in the 50,000 to the capital improvement fund, which, again, we have, but we wouldn't necessarily have to. And that's just something I would leave to council if you wanted to do that. It'd be another 50,000.
we transfer
Kind of a
in.
one-time though, because then we do transfer every year that, so it really is almost kind of a Band-Aid for this year in a sense, if you wanted to go that route, versus we're gonna try and do it next year to keep that fund going, so we can do the things that we just talked about.
Well, in essence, we're drawing that plus more out of that fund. So
Right. So maybe
Transferred in and
that's
they-
something we would sit and leave.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my attitude is it would, rather than pulling the 50,000, stop, not putting the 50,000 in, I like the idea of doing what we have been doing, and if necessary, we can just spend that 50,000 on other things that count as, capital improvement funds. But rather than stopping the 50, I'd rather kind of, I don't know, play the shell game of moving it in and then spending it from there, just so we have that history of moving it in.
Okay. I like that. I think that's all I have, actually. Yes, I believe so. Library, do we want to bother with the 4,000 then, or not? It's up to you. I just want to offer it up because it was offered up to me.
Let's leave
I
it as this.
appreciate your efforts, but I would leave it.
Okay.
Or
If everybody's. that's
leave,
fine.
Let her use her discretion as
Yep,
the year
she can
goes
go.
on. If
Yep.
something runs over, that's where she would make it up by postponing that.
or we could see where we're at with the final numbers, and we can always,
Absolutely.
Save that cut for later.
Well, I think factoring in everything that we've done, it's a reduction of 325,000, what we've taken out today from where we were.
And do you have like a quick list of how we did that?
Yep, I do. Starting from the bottom up, the 10,000 from the legal fees, the attorney area for outside fees that we think we'll be able to accomplish. 15,000 was moving the computers and the laptop possible mics into the capital improvement fund. 20,000 was the audio visual going in the capital improvement fund. 27,000 was the mower going in the capital improvement fund. 73,000 was the final payment of the fire truck going in that fund. 40,000 was the reduction in the HR position to a 60% position regardless of what we do. 10,000 was postage. That would not be necessary as utilities move over into Waverly Utilities. And then the 130 was the staffing-related expenses for that move from utilities as well. And that's what tallies the 325. That's my calculator's not right again.
And how does that affect where we started with the levy and ended up? As
Well,
best
we
you,
were kind of trying to hammer that out a little bit. Let me get a quick the math here.
and what's this current fiscal year's levy again?
What's that?
Where were we at for this fiscal year that we're in right now?
1417.
14, 17?
Right.
Yeah, 14, 18.
The rounding, yes. I would put that at about a reduction of levy of about 78 cents, somewhere in there.
That doesn't include
From,
20th, which would be a
Or
40.
doesn't include any projects in
right,
necessarily.
so that's minus 78 cents from 1470,
1478, let's call it.
1480.
Sure. It's gonna make it a nice even number, 78 cents from 1478 makes you a 14 even, is what I'd call it. It puts you about 14 even.
Per $1,000 of value.
Right. That's about the closest I can get is about, let's
That's
call it
pretty close.
14.
That's helpful.
And then whatever you would want to add back on,
Right.
whether it be the 40 cents for 20th or the 22 for Cedar or both or either. Those are the two that we've talked about. And then the South Riverside Park, I know there's been some discussion, do we do it or not? The 200,000 would be another 5 cents roughly on a 10-year bond. The 500,000 would be probably about 12 cents. So those are the numbers that I would give you for that.
Say that again, those two. And that's for the park you're thinking?
Yeah, do you have a couple of pictures of that tab that you could just kind of, again, dollar amounts? It'd be helpful to probably have you see that one more time since it's been a little while since we looked at it.
How much was it, James, for 200 versus 500,000?
About 5 cents on a $200,000 and about 12 cents on a $500,000, roughly.
And is it, again, this might be a dumb question, but if you go up or down, is it the same
Yeah,
effect?
it's just the impact of the project itself. So if this was in the budget and you were to reduce it, it would reduce it that amount.
Yeah, okay.
But since we didn't put anything in, that's how we have it. So Tab's got a kind of an overarching position to kind of what that would look like, the total project.
This is the artist rendition of it. It's about 1.5 million to do everything. An overhead scan of the plan would be that we would, in phase one, we would do the exchange building, renovate that. It's historically significant, so we'd want to preserve that. So it'd be usable in the future. The new open shelter is the old storage building, the old park shop, and we found that that is not a visual pleasure to look at, and it's not in good shape either, and it's not sustainable type thing. So we would take that down and have it basically be an open area right now, potentially have some events in there where we could park things, possibly the farmer's market. The other thing we would look at is thinning out the vegetation so you'd be able to see views of the river from up on top and possibly from the street. And then the last thing would be a pedestrian way along the street, which we don't have right now. That'd be
That's the
like a
phase.
first phase type thing.
$200,000 roughly.
Right.
Now, the exchange building, is that in deteriorating condition where if we don't do something, we run the risk of losing the building? Or is this something that kind of needs to be done sooner to preserve the building? Or is this, if we put it off a year or two, it wouldn't significantly change our situation?
We're not seeing a settling or any damage in the brickwork. Most of it is in the soft materials, the wood, and it's got a hole in the roof right now, those types of things. So
Holes in the roof are bad.
Yes. But it's I think I'd rather do it now more than later. Here's the breakdown of the costs in option one. Tree inventory produce building, about 203,000. We'd add about 7% on that for the architect's fees. And then option two would be everything except for the bike trail improvements plus the river access and bank improvement. And that would be increased visibility of the river, oil slope access ADA for people to actually go down to the river and clean up the debris in the foliage. Picture right here shows a ramp, you might say, to the north and the south. I've gotten confirmation from the architect that if we just did the north, which is along the fire department property, actually it's all city property, if we just did the north end, that would reduce $100,000 off of it, so we wouldn't do the south ramp. And that would achieve the objectives of getting people down to the river. So 400 to 500,000 for phase two. That'd be phase one plus phase two. So that would be a dime to 12 and a half cents type thing.
But if we just did the first phase itself, which is the building remodel, the removing of the other building, some thinning of the, making things more visible, a little improvement to the bike trail, that's the 200,000, that's the
Right.
nickel we were talking about.
One of the big things about it is if you drive by and you're from an out of town or something like that, it just doesn't look very attractive. And this would clean it up pretty nicely and make things better. Just removal of the one building would make it look better.
Well, I have to say, I prefer the idea of a series of small improvements rather than a large commitment of capital, partially because, we have expectations of how we think this is going to be used, but I would hate to put a whole lot of money down and then find that, no, people just aren't interested in it. The idea of kind of small, continuous improvements, 100,000, 200,000, over time, and watching this grow slowly. And then if we see it's being used in ways we didn't anticipate, we can adjust our plans accordingly. So the smaller of those two options appeals to me much more than the larger.
Well, and that's exactly what the architects said in their presentation is they don't believe in if you build it, they will come type thing. They believe in if you make improvements, try to get some people there, make some programs or get some activities there, and as the use increases, then you improve it.
So Tab, is there a third phase with the splash pad that he presented? Because that's not part of this.
That's not part of the cost, but it's definitely in the picture.
Right.
Here's the finished product. You might say there's a splash pad right in here. This is a shelter facility still for events. Farmers market could be housed underneath there.
And that's in the first, that's in the
That'd be a third phase.
Third
Here's the
phase.
third phase.
okay. So it'd just
And
be
it could be the
open.
third, fourth, fifth, and sixth phase. Who
But you
knows?
take out the building, but you don't put the roof over it in the first option you mentioned.
Right. We found that the block around the outside of that building was probably made in Waverly, so we'd like to kind of keep that
Yeah,
portion of it.
As a
and then-
border.
And then keep the floor in it, potentially take out all the broken concrete stuff, but have some sort of floor in it so we have a place for people to do things.
Would you be able to do the roof over the area now? Would you be able to do that as the first or second phase also, instead of waiting till the third or fourth phase?
That add at least $100,000 onto it. Again, we could have activities there without a roof.
Right, but a roof makes more sense if you're going to be there in the rain, that you would have, or in very hot weather, that you have a roof over it rather than just basically a cement pad where the building used to be.
Yep, that's right.
Based on a conversation I had with the chamber the other day, meeting with Travis and his staff, the farmer's market may want to use that this season because their location on First Street or First Avenue is going to disappear with Bremer Avenue construction. And So it's another cooperative effort between, regardless of whether the buildings are there or what shape they're in, that they're gonna be
Want us
looking
to
for.
investigate what the cost of a roof would be. I mean, we don't have to make this decision now. I mean, you're talking 5, 10 cents difference, 12 cents, whatever it may be on the levy. You know, if you could find out what a roof, at least just that part of it for that, just the roof additionally versus say you don't do the trail system right away, but if you did the building renovation, the remodel or demolition of the other with the roof and some clearing, you know, is that a middle cost of 300,000, 325? Is it right in there? And does that become a 7.5 cent, 8 cent? You know, that hybrid. Can we possibly Monday see if they can ballpark that for us, what that would look like?
Well, we have that, I believe.
I just didn't know if we had that broken out separate, the roof itself.
Again, looking at this, it looks like steel roof, that type of thing. There's other types of material that I'm sure could bring down the cost. Again, may not be as long-standing, but
Right. Large park shelters, 298 is what this says.
Oh, to build that building itself would be 300,000.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought when you said 300,000, the whole project would be 300,000.
Just clearing it, just having it open with the, as part of the project, but not having a structure.
Right.
They don't have a roof now.
No.
They can try this space next year.
Right.
In
Well, and then that kind of talks to Brian's point of, you know, we take small bites and see if the farmer's market moves out there, if they have success out there. And if they do, then we can look at putting a roof on and doing other kinds of improvements, so.
Tab, you're referring to the produce building removal for 73,000. That seems an exorbitantly high number to demolish a building.
There's a asbestos issue with it, so that's going to cost a little bit more.
Okay.
It's old.
Yeah,
and not wanting to jump forward too fast here, but as I kind of look at final numbers where we've been, again, I truly appreciate the time and effort staff have put into this and the diligence they put into it. I think we've probably done more strategic planning here than we did the last 4 years when we even tried to do strategic planning. So I think everybody should be complimented from that standpoint. But with the 345,000 that we've kind of removed, where that brings the levy in, I would be very comfortable seeing the 20th Street project and Phase 1 of the South Riverside project being folded in to that with the understanding that Cedar Lane would become a top priority for the next budgeting session.
I completely agree.
I would like to have us consider doing the extended Phase 1 on the 20th Street project, carrying it all the way to 5th Street rather than just the railroad crossings. I think that has some real utility of doing that all at one time, rather than trying to break that up into a couple of projects. I agree with everything else that you said, and I think you already know my position on the Cedar Valley Parkway project. I'd like to see that delayed. So,
I hate to see the
full
Cedar
project would be
Lane.
another 1.6, just for reference in a sense, and that would take you to, because right now, with the way I see it, we were at 14. If you add in 20th Street, if you did the first phase, we thought was about 5 cents, we did 14.45. That would take us to 14.85, which is about the levy we started at for the full phase from start to finish of 20th Street.
I hate to see the Cedar Lane pushed. I mean, I know that the plan would be to do it still next summer, but
Next year, just after July 1.
if, depending on what our situation looks like this time next year,
Right.
right? So I think there's a lot of,
Payment of the second payment of Bremer Avenue factored in, we have to have that.
Yeah.
Other than that, I can't remember offhand the other projects that I had listed that would come on, but, well, the second phase of 20th, if you don't do it now, would be part of that. So it would be a little bit, I mean,
The financing for the parkway, the TIF money cannot be reallocated. There's no other projects in the TIF district that increment can be used for.
it would be TIF debt that we'd have to incur to
Yeah.
pay that off with. And I know the Bremer has some TIF, that it's a possibility, and 20th has some TIF as well, portions of it.
But the majority of it could not be used for other projects, and it would be my understanding anyway.
Could be, but then it, as James said, it's
got to be through debt.
Delays the
Yeah.
parkway by multiple years, not 1 year.
And the lost,
They keep changing around the laws and that all the time, and every year they try to hit you with more and more, so we're trying to keep up with what we can and can't do. And the simplest understanding for me is the TIF funds can be used to pay off TIF debt. So if we want to do a project, you have to borrow for it. Even if you use it to pay it off in a
Right.
year or 2 or 5 years, you have to borrow first, then use the debt
Yeah.
from TIF to pay it.
Yeah.
So depending on the project, if it was eligible, like Bremer would be part of 20th, you know, the Parkway, I would think even part of 4th Street, would that be partly in the TIF?
That's all
That-
TIF.
Those are all things that part of the debt could be TIF related. But I know we're having a drop off in our value. Do we not have a TIF district ending? Yeah, so I mean, we're gonna have a little reduction there. So again, we try to be mindful of what we have to work with. But that's what it can be used for, is if we go into a debt project for a certain item that is TIF eligible,
Well,
we can pull that.
When you have to go into debt for a certain item that is within that TIF district. I mean, you have multiple TIF districts, you can't use property, TIF money from one district.
We've combined them all into.
It's a unified district, so we can do that.
Okay.
Yes, we can do that. It's unified. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do that. That's
Right.
correct.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of my question. I don't know if that's what Dean was getting to, but, you know, if we were going to be using TIF funds for the Cedar Valley Parkway, and then we decided to delay that for 10 years, which I don't have a problem with, by the way, you know, could we use that money for other projects, or would that just be sitting there? So,
We could use it. Other TIF eligible projects across the city could be used for that.
And I understand where Rod's coming from, but I think the Cedar River Parkway is a linchpin for doing a lot of other projects moving forward. It allows us, when 4th Street is under construction, to have some access
Alternate
there.
route.
It allows us to look at some things downtown with what we want to do with downtown streetscaping and other things, and maybe re-energizing, revitalizing that district, trying to do some things because we're pulling some traffic off of that. It opens up some land for development, whether it's immediate or down the road a few years, but I would think within 10 years, there would be some development within that land versus pushing it off for 10 years. I mean, we've already seen the first phase of it, how quickly that developed, and that was, I think, surprising to us is how quickly it developed, but it did develop. So I see it kind of being the first domino to allow other things. It gives us that 500-year flood bridge versus, you know, if we have to do Bremer Avenue Bridge sometime in the next 10 years, which may be a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I would want to speak in favor of the Cedar Parkway Bridge. I mean, I remember the 2008 flood and not being able to get from the east side of town to the west side of town. And I think we need to get more reliable ways to get across the river. And we've got, in essence, one bridge right now at Bremer Avenue, which is 70 years old, and it would be really nice to have another reliable way to get across the river.
I think if Parkway is delayed, then the Green Bridge becomes focal point again, right off the bat. So, but I think the general consensus is let's get the Parkway finished up, usable, and see what happens, then we can make a determination on the Green Bridge. But
Just to make sure I don't walk out of here confused, funding for the Parkway project is a combination of TIF and majority lost?
60%, we would try to keep it at for loss, so yeah, majority.
And that would not affect the property tax rate.
No, we're already drawing local option for that
Okay.
allowed purpose, and TIF, it is TIF eligible, it's been in the district now. And again, even when we look at it, I gotta look at the language as well and the local option, and it's another hurdle we have to get through now. But we may have to make a partial payment first year to make it fit within the capacity, and I gotta rerun that and see what it looks like if we do delay Cedar Lane, and we just gotta rerun that and make sure it all looks good, but I think it does. It's just, I wanna make sure on paper it does. So from what I'm taking away then, is you want us to factor in a payment at some point for the Parkway, where we'll show it somehow. 20th Street. Is 20th Street going in?
Yeah, how much does it,
Are-
if
Are we
we,
talking about the whole
if we
20th
go
or
all the
first
way to
half? That's
Fifth,
kind of the question.
how much does that raise you said 40 if we just stop,
Yep.
How about if you go all the way down to Fifth?
Another 40.
Another 40.
It's another 1.6 million to do the final other piece. It was kind of broken in half roughly in two different phases. Is that accurate, Mike? About another 1.6 million?
Yeah, and we're really to the point where you're going to have two separate projects because in just a few weeks, we're going to be bringing, in fact, final plans to the council on this, on the railroad crossing improvements. We have a fixed window to coordinate with the railroad to do the crossing gates, signals, and roadway improvements. To try to now expand it down to Fifth Street or Fifth Avenue and stuff, that is really needs to be looked at as a standalone project. Now, could we do it in the spring of 19? That window would probably work. But we're now really kind of to the point where we're talking individual projects.
So there's no huge benefit for trying to combine them, like do it together?
No, because
Okay.
we got property acquisition and other things to work through for that other component.
Well, and that, if, that could be a capacity issue as well, because instead of 11 and a half, you're talking 12 point, really tight then. And we'd have to really take a hard look at, could we accomplish it? And that's where, again, as silly as it is, July 1st, everything's new again. And it's ridiculous, but that's what legally, that's how it works with the capacity of everything, so.
I suppose I'm not opposed to the idea of doing the combined 20th, but I don't necessarily see the advantage of doing it. So, and if we're running into questions of capacity, I'm ready to just push that off for the next year.
And I'll know that in an hour. I'll know that
Sure.
less time than that, but we won't be here, obviously. You guys won't. But I mean, I'll know that for Monday. That's an easy one to go figure out. It's just getting everything reset as to what we think we have. So are we okay then as council doing the first part of 20th Street? Railroad improvements and all that?
Yes.
Yeah, my concern on this, I'm going to throw this out here one more time because I feel it's necessary for me to do this, is that when we're looking at, limited resources, we don't have unlimited resources. And we're already talking about delaying other projects because we may not be able to have the funding for doing them. And I realize the Cedar Valley Parkway may not necessarily be funded with tax money, but it is still with property tax levy, but it's still being funded by tax money because we're still getting TIF money, which is property tax money. We're still getting local option sales tax money. And if we weren't using that money for the parkway, that money would be available to do some of these other projects. I don't want to come back here next year when we're doing the budget meeting and say, well, we can't finish 20th Street because we don't have the money for it, or we can't do 4th Street because we don't have the money for it, or we can't do some other project because we don't have the money for it. When we're looking at allocating scarce resources, to me, the Cedar Valley project is a project that's being completed just because we want to complete a project. And it's been on the board for a long time, and we want to get it done. I think some of the purported benefits for it, and there are some benefits, I understand that, I agree with that, but I don't think that there are going to be benefits that are worth spending the $11 million right now on this project. I don't think we're going to see a huge reduction in traffic on Bremer Avenue. I don't think we're going to see a huge reduction in semi-traffic on Bremer Avenue. I don't see that we're going to have a whole lot of development going on in that area. I know we have to have another bridge crossing over the Cedar River. I 100% agree with that. But if we have an emergency trying to cross that bridge, drive a mile, mile and a half to the east side of town, turn around, drive another mile back, that's really not providing emergency access as it would if we had another bridge that was closer to the downtown area. So the one big benefit that I can see is that if we can talk the state into designating that as Highway 3, and we'll have more control over Bremer Avenue and be able to do some development things on Bremer Avenue that we can't do now in downtown, and I know that's been referred to, which would be a fantastic thing. But here again, there's a reason that the state has not gone forward with this project, even though it was originally a DOT project. It's because they didn't see it was necessary. So I guess my question is, why are we spending $11 million of city funds to build a bypass so that people can drive around the city of Waverly. I just don't think it's a very effective use of limited city funds, and I know we'll probably come up to vote, and it'll be a 6-1 vote, and I'll get outvoted, and that's the way democracy works. But I think I needed to state my reasons for opposing the project. So, thank you.
Okay, so right now then, I've got 1440, let's call it that, until we get everything sorted out. And then what about, again, it was brought up possibly the first phase, the $200,000 roughly phase of the South Riverside Park. Is that something we want to include or not?
Would be my desire.
Yes, mine too.
I see James bringing a summary sheet back to us, starting where we started out at somewhere around the 1480 or 85 point, factoring in the deductions that got us down to roughly 14, and then begin to give us options to bring it back up wherever the council decides to quit.
Well, that's what we're doing right now, though,
Yeah,
is to try and get an
right.
idea of
Yeah.
where's it going to end,
Yeah.
because I
No.
can't get a summary unless I know what's in or out.
Yeah.
And so that's all I'm looking is
But I
is
s-
the park in or out?
I
So,
see
so,
that,
so
you
my,
know.
I suppose before I say yes or no on this one, I want to know, is there something you're going to ask me after this one?
This is it,
This is the last one,
So
okay.
go through them again from 1402 up.
from what end?
So you're talking the first phase of the South
Yeah,
Riverside
just the
Park?
first phase.
Okay.
First phase, the
And the
200,000 or
small.
218, whatever it is, the 7% fee on it. That's the one that I'm talking about, not the bigger one, the 500,000, just the first 200,000 to get the building going and get the other one taken down and clear the foliage. That's the one I'm looking
Okay.
at. Because the only other thing to be decided then, we'll throw it out there, and I think I already had a decision on it, was Cedar Lane. Do we postpone it until after July 1 next year?
And yeah, I think
it-
we want to postpone that till
I'd
after
like to see
July
the
1.
numbers either way.
Okay. Well, it's an extra 22 cents, so it'd take you to 1467 or 1445, roughly. So it'd be those two numbers, and then it would be a matter of, do you do the first phase of the park or not? Since I don't think there's an appetite for the second phase as well, is it the first phase or not? Which I would put it at probably 6 cents or so, 6 cents, right in there, just because of the added fee for engineering, the 215, whatever it is.
Again, Cedar Lane is very high on my priority list, but when I look at the construction window to try to fit it in,
Right.
to me, we're going to cause ourselves more pain by trying to force it into this funding cycle.
I think it's true.
So I would say, yes, it's a priority, and we're somewhat committing ourselves to making sure it's included in the budget a year from now. But just because of the construction window implications, I think that's where it fits.
Okay, any other direction for,
I think I have 20th Street in the first phase, Cedar Lane delayed till after July 1, the next
Correct.
fiscal year, then the park, the first phase. I still don't know if I have it clear. Is that in, is that out?
In.
We
Yeah, I
can't
think
vote,
I'm
I'm
in.
just seeing you
Yeah,
head
I
nods
think
or,
I'm in. I mean, it's also something that if push comes to shove, that may be the first thing out.
Right.
But I would include it for now.
so, because we're going into hearing again, we can reduce if we need to. I
Mhm.
just want to know, do we even want to start with it to begin?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's
my
worth for,
conditions like Brian's put it in, and that'd be the first thing I would strip out if need be.
And as it sits, I would put us at about a 1445, give or take a few. We'll try and form everything up and see what it does look like when it's finally, but it's a lot of moving, a lot of shuffling, a lot of, so we'll see if Jenny can get that done. Monday night, we come back, we'll try and have something for you based on what we can get.
what's that look, Jenny?
It's a lot of movement. I mean, we make these cuts here and there, but then you have funds that, 810 is 810 no matter what. You have the employee benefit fund. All that's got to be shifted and tied out to make sure this is right. When we go and publicly say this is it, we want to make sure it's it, and that's not something we do in an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours. It takes some time.
I just hope we're not delaying Cedar Lane, because truly it's a construction issue, that it's an advantage to do the Adams Parkway Bridge first, and it's not because we don't have the appetite to fix that street.
No.
Because-
Oh, I think we've got the
I
appetite.
think we want
Yeah,
to get it
because that's a
done.
project, there's a
Timing
lot of
issue.
people out there. And
Yeah,
that's
There's more people out there all the time.
you know, there's a lot
This
of
kind of
people.
came up a couple years ago, and we had the opportunity to possibly do Cedar Lane before we did Bremer. And I was of the opinion at that point that the traffic that would go on to, I didn't want to do a brand-new street at Cedar Lane and then put all the traffic from Bremer onto it and beat it up right away. So it was kind of like hoping, crossing our fingers that it wouldn't deteriorate too much while we did Bremer, that we could then be doing it right after. And for me, it's just a window where it lines up. We have Adams Parkway that needs to get done, can be done without hitting the tax base.
Bremer will be finished by then.
Bremer will be finished, and then we can get Cedar Lane and get that done all in 2019. It'll just be spring for the bridge and fall for after July for the.
Late summer.
That's all I have, sir. I don't have anything else, I don't think, unless there's any other questions, direction you want to give or anything like that. Again, we have Monday night as well, if we can get some things situated and hammered out.
Council satisfied? Staff comments?
Appreciate all the hard work again.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'd entertain a motion for adjournment.
We adjourn.
Second? Second?
Favor aye?
Hi.